When you send your child to school, you're placing them in the hands of people you trust. Teachers shape young minds, protect vulnerable students, and stand as pillars of the community. They're the adults your children look up to, confide in, spend hours with every single day. You trust them to keep your kids safe. You never imagine that behind the gentle smile and encouraging words could be someone capable of unthinkable evil. But for dozens of families across America, that nightmare became reality. The teacher who volunteered for after-school programs was stalking their next victim. The beloved coach who parents praised was planning murder. The educator who won awards and sat on committees had already taken lives. These weren't strangers lurking in dark alleys. They were respected members of society who'd passed background checks, earned degrees, and gained the trust of entire communities. They used their positions of authority to manipulate, to access, to destroy. And when their crimes were finally uncovered, the horror went beyond the murders themselves. It shattered the fundamental trust that holds our schools and communities together. Parents were left asking how they could have missed the signs. Students realized the person who helped them with homework was a killer. Colleagues discovered they'd worked alongside a monster for years. Today, we're covering every teacher who betrayed that sacred trust in the worst possible way and now sits on death row waiting for execution. What you're about to hear will disturb you to your core, because these cases prove that sometimes the greatest danger to our children doesn't come from the outside. It comes from the very people we trusted to protect them. Case number 1. Brenda Andrew was a Sunday school teacher. She lived in Oklahoma City with her husband Rob and their 2 children. They went to church together. They seemed like a normal family. But on November 20th, 2001, everything changed. Rob Andrew was shot and killed in his own garage. His wife Brenda was there when it happened. She told police that masked men broke in and shot them both. But the police would soon learn that this story was a lie. What really happened that night was much worse than anyone could have imagined. Brenda Evers was born in December 1963 in Enid, Oklahoma. Her family was very religious. They went to church multiple times every week. Brenda grew up in a strict conservative home. Her parents made sure she followed all the rules. She took baton twirling classes. She was quiet. People who knew her in high school said she always dressed very modestly. She buttoned her clothes all the way up. She seemed like the kind of girl who would never break the rules. Rob Andrew was born in September 1962, also in Enid. He came from a religious family too. He had 3 brothers named Bill, Tim, and Tom. Rob was friendly and outgoing. Everyone who knew him said he was always smiling. He liked to make people laugh. Rob went to Oklahoma State University to study advertising and marketing. While he was there, Brenda was still in high school. Her older brother knew Rob. Through her brother, Brenda met Rob. They started dating. Brenda followed Rob to Oklahoma State University after she graduated from high school. Rob and Brenda got married on June 2, 1984. Brenda was 20 years old. Rob was 21. After they got married, they moved to Texas for a while. Then they came back to Oklahoma. Rob got a job at Jordan Advertising, a company in Oklahoma City. He was good at his job. He worked his way up to become a senior vice president. He handled big accounts for the company. His co-workers said he was smart and worked hard. He made good money for his family. In 1990, Brenda and Rob had their first child. They named her Tricity Marie. Rob chose the name Tricity because he thought if she ever ran for public office, her campaign slogan could be "Electricity." That was the kind of funny thing Rob liked to do. He brought humour into everyday life. For example, on July 11th every year, he would bring slushes to everyone at work because he decided July 11th should be 7-Eleven Day. His co-workers said he was the kind of person who could find something good to say about everyone. He was optimistic and kind. In 1994, Brenda and Rob had their second child. They named him Parker Bryce. Rob loved being a father. He played Nintendo video games with his kids. One of his favourite things to do was let his children win at the games. He thought making his kids happy was one of the greatest pleasures in life. Rob was also very involved in his community and his church. He was a deacon at North Point Baptist Church in Oklahoma City. He did missionary work in South America. He served on the board of directors for Positive Tomorrows and Junior Achievement. People who knew Rob said he was devoted to his wife and children. He was a good man. But while Rob was happy with his life, Brenda was not. Rob wanted Brenda to stay home and not work outside the house. She became a stay-at-home mum, but she grew bored and unhappy. Friends said that the marriage seemed unbalanced. Rob showed much more love toward Brenda than she showed toward him. Right after their honeymoon in 1984, Brenda told Rob she wished they had not gotten married. She said it was not the right thing to do. But Rob was an optimist. He believed in marriage. He did not believe in divorce. He thought they could work through their problems. Over the years, Brenda began to change. She started wearing tight clothes that showed a lot of skin. This was very different from how she dressed when she was younger. People at their church noticed. One man who worked with Rob said he was shocked by how Brenda dressed. He said her dresses were very tight, very short, and showed a lot of cleavage. This made people uncomfortable at church because it seemed inappropriate for a Sunday school teacher. Brenda also started having affairs with other men. She had multiple relationships outside her marriage. One affair was with a man named Rick Nunley. That relationship ended in 1997, about 4 years before Rob was killed. She had another affair with a man she met at a grocery store. She gave him a motel room key while they were talking in the vegetable section. She even brought this man to her home for dinner with her children while Rob was away. Rob came home early and found them there. Rob and Brenda separated and got back together at least once during their marriage. Rob always hoped they could fix their relationship. Even when Brenda was cruel to him, he tried to stay hopeful. She left mean messages on his answering machine. In one recording that was played during the trial, she called him a half-dad. She spoke to him in a harsh, cruel way. But Rob kept trying to save the marriage. He suggested they go to marriage counselling. They tried counselling multiple times. They also talked to spiritual advisors at their church, but nothing seemed to help. In 1999, Brenda met a man named James Pavitt at North Point Baptist Church. James was born in November 1953, so he was 10 years older than Brenda. He had been married twice before. He was an insurance salesman. He also taught Sunday school at the church. James became friends with Rob. They even went on hunting trips together. Rob trusted James. In early 2001, James Pavitt helped Rob set up a new life insurance policy. The policy was worth $800,000. Brenda was named as the only person who would get the money if Rob died. This was a very large life insurance policy. At the same time this was happening, Brenda and James were starting a romantic relationship. They taught Sunday school classes together. People at the church noticed they were spending a lot of time together. They would eat lunch together. They sat very close to each other after church. People started talking about it. Eventually, the church asked both Brenda and James to stop teaching Sunday school because of their inappropriate behaviour. By 2001, after 17 years of marriage, Brenda and Rob's relationship was falling apart completely. James Pavitt's wife, Suk Hui, filed for divorce from him in 2001. In September 2001, Rob moved out of the family home. He and Brenda were separated. Brenda filed for divorce either in late September or early October 2001. Rob was still hoping they might get back together, but he was starting to accept that the marriage might really be over. Rob tried to change his life insurance policy. He wanted to remove Brenda as the person who would get the money if he died. He wanted to change it so that his 2 children, Tricity and Parker, would get the money instead. But Brenda and James tried to stop him from making this change. They did not want him to remove Brenda from the policy. Then strange and scary things started happening to Rob. In late October 2001, someone cut the brake lines on Rob's car. Brake lines are the parts of a car that make the brakes work. If the brake lines are cut, the car cannot stop properly. This could cause a very bad accident that could kill the driver and hurt other people on the road. On October 25th or 26th, 2001, the brake lines on Rob's Nissan were cut. The next morning, Rob got phone calls from unknown people. One call was from a woman. One call was from a man. Both callers told Rob that Brenda had been in a car accident. They said she was at Norman Regional Hospital in Norman, Oklahoma, and she needed him to come right away. Later, police found out that the woman who called was Jana Larson. She was James Pavitt's adult daughter. James had told Jana to make the call. He told her to use a payphone so the call could not be traced. James wanted Rob to drive to Norman on the highway with his broken brakes. This could have caused Rob to crash and die. But Rob was smart. Before he got in his car to drive to the hospital, he checked his vehicle. He discovered that someone had cut his brake lines. He realised right away that this was dangerous. He called the police. He filed a police report. In the report, he told police that he thought Brenda and James Pavitt were trying to kill him. He said he believed they wanted to collect the $800,000 from his life insurance policy. The police took his statement. They recorded what he said, but it is not clear if the police did any investigation at that time. The next day after the brake line incident, Brenda went to see Rob. She told him she had read in the newspaper that someone cut his brakes, but this was strange because there had been no news coverage of the brake cutting. The media had not reported it. So how did Brenda know about it? This was another clue that Brenda was involved in trying to hurt Rob. A few weeks later, on November 2nd, 2001, Rob filed another police report. He told the police again that he thought his wife and James Pavitt were plotting to kill him for the insurance money. He was right. 18 days later, they would succeed. November 20th, 2001 was 2 days before Thanksgiving. It was a Tuesday evening. Rob had plans to pick up his two children, Tricity and Parker, and take them to his parents' house in Enid for the Thanksgiving holiday. Tricity was 11 years old. Parker was 7 years old. The usual routine was that Brenda would bring the children out to Rob's car in the driveway, and Rob would take them from there. But on this night, Brenda changed the routine. When Rob arrived at the house on Shaftesbury Drive in northwest Oklahoma City around 7 p.m., Brenda asked him to come into the garage. She told him that the pilot light on the furnace had gone out. She asked him to help her light it again. Rob agreed to help. He was a kind person, and even though they were separated, he was willing to help Brenda with a problem in the house. Rob walked into the garage. He went to the furnace and bent down or knelt down to look at the pilot light. While he was in this position, someone shot him with a 16-gauge shotgun. The shot hit him in the abdomen. Rob tried to protect himself. He grabbed a trash bag that was on the garage floor. The bag was full of empty aluminium cans. He held it in front of himself like a shield. The person shot through the bag anyway. After the first shot, the shooter reloaded the shotgun. Then the shooter walked closer to Rob. By this time, Rob was on the floor. The shooter got within 3 feet of him and shot him a second time. This second shot was the fatal one. It caused massive blood loss and internal damage. Rob died in his garage. While this was happening, Tricity and Parker were in the master bedroom of the house. They were watching television. Brenda had turned the volume up very loud. The children could not hear what was happening in the garage. They did not know their father was being killed just a short distance away from them. After Rob was shot, someone also shot Brenda. She was shot in the arm with a .22 caliber pistol, but her wound was very different from Rob's. His wounds were terrible and fatal. Her wound was small and not serious. It was what some people call a flesh wound. It did not cause major damage. Brenda called 911. She told the operator that she and her husband had been shot. She said that 2 masked men wearing black had come into the garage and attacked them. She said the men had guns. She told the 911 operator that Rob was still conscious and trying to speak, but by the time the police and emergency workers arrived, Rob was already dead. He had lost too much blood. The emergency workers could not save him. The police and paramedics arrived at the scene. They found Rob's body on the garage floor. He had been shot twice with a shotgun. They found a spent shell casing from a 16-gauge shotgun. They also found evidence of a .22 caliber bullet, which was what Brenda had been shot with. Brenda was taken to the hospital in an ambulance. People at the hospital said she seemed very calm for someone who had just been shot and whose husband had just been killed. Her behaviour seemed strange. The police looked at the house. There were no signs that anyone had broken in. All the doors and windows were normal. Nothing was missing from the house. If this had really been a robbery, the robbers would have taken something, but nothing was stolen. The children were safe in the bedroom. They had not been hurt or even frightened because they could not hear what was happening. The police started to investigate. They talked to Brenda at the hospital. They asked her what happened. She told them her story about the 2 masked men, but the police were suspicious. They knew that Rob had filed reports saying Brenda and James Pavitt were trying to kill him. They knew about the cut brake lines. They knew about the large life insurance policy. All of this made them wonder if Brenda was telling the truth. The police also looked at the forensic evidence. Forensic evidence is the scientific evidence from a crime scene. They examined how Rob was shot. The 2 shots that killed Rob came from different angles. This did not match Brenda's story that the shooters were standing across the garage. One shot had been fired from a distance. The second shot had been fired from very close, only about 3 feet away. This suggested that there were 2 different shooting positions, or that the shooter moved closer for the second shot. They also looked at Brenda's wound. They found a ring of gunpowder residue on Brenda's clothing around where she was shot. Gunpowder residue is the leftover material from when a gun is fired. When a gun is fired very close to something, it leaves this residue. The ring of residue showed that Brenda had been shot from very close range, not from across the garage like she claimed. Her wound also appeared to be staged, meaning it looked like it was done on purpose to make her look like a victim. The police believed that Brenda's story did not match the evidence. They suspected that James Pavitt had shot Rob, and then James had shot Brenda in the arm to make it look like they were both victims of a random attack, but they needed more evidence. While the police were investigating, Brenda did something very suspicious. Rob's funeral was scheduled for a few days after his death. Brenda did not attend the funeral. She did not take Tricity and Parker to their father's funeral. Instead, on the day of Rob's funeral, Brenda, James Pavitt, and the two children crossed the border into Mexico. They left the country. This made Brenda and James look very guilty. Why would an innocent person run away right when the police were investigating? Why would a mother take her children away from their father's funeral and flee the country? The police saw this as proof that Brenda and James knew they were guilty. The police issued arrest warrants for both Brenda Andrew and James Pavitt. They were charged with first-degree murder. The FBI joined the search because Brenda and James had crossed into another country. For almost 3 months, Brenda and James travelled around Mexico with Tricity and Parker. The children were with them the whole time. James called his daughter Jana while he was in Mexico. The police had asked Jana to help them. She agreed to let the police record her phone calls with her father. During one call, James asked Jana to bring him $5,000. She asked him to get the money in the United States instead. The FBI was listening to all of this. In late February 2002, Brenda and James tried to cross back into the United States from Mexico. They ran out of money in Mexico and had to come back. On February 28, 2002, they were arrested at a border crossing near Hidalgo, Texas. Brenda was in one car, James Pavitt was in another car. Tricity and Parker were with them. Also arrested was James Bolin, who was Brenda's brother-in-law. He was driving a van with the children. The police arrested Brenda and James. Tricity and Parker were picked up by their paternal grandparents, Rob's parents, E.R. and Lou Andrew. The grandparents took the children to live with them in Enid. The children were safe, but they had just been through a terrible experience. They had lost their father to murder, and their mother was now in jail for killing him. After Brenda and James were arrested, they were brought back to Oklahoma. They were held in the Oklahoma County Jail without bail. James Pavitt eventually told someone that he had killed Rob Andrew. He confessed to shooting Rob, but he said that Brenda had nothing to do with it. He insisted she was innocent. However, the police did not believe him. They had too much evidence that Brenda was involved in planning the murder. While Brenda was in jail waiting for her trial, she was in the same area as another inmate named Teresa Sullivan. Sullivan was a federal inmate who was being held in the Oklahoma County Jail. Later, Sullivan would testify that Brenda confessed to her about the murder. Sullivan said that Brenda told her that she and James Pavitt killed Rob for the money, the house, the kids, and each other. Sullivan said Brenda also told her that James shot her in the arm on purpose to make it look like she was a victim too. The police also found other evidence. 8 days before Rob was killed, someone saw Brenda at a shooting range near her family's property in Garfield County. After Rob was killed, investigators found 16-gauge shotgun shells at that shooting range. This suggested that Brenda had been practicing with the gun that would later be used to kill Rob. The police also discovered that Rob's shotgun was missing from the house. When Rob moved out in September 2001, a witness named James Higgins saw the shotgun in the bedroom closet. Brenda told police that Rob had taken the shotgun with him when he moved out, but Rob had told friends that Brenda would not let him into the house to get his shotgun. The shotgun that was used to kill Rob was a 16-gauge shotgun. Police believed it was Rob's own gun and that Brenda had kept it when Rob moved out. Police also found evidence about the .22 caliber gun that was used to shoot Brenda. James Pavitt had purchased a .22 caliber handgun from a gun shop shortly before the murder. On the day of the murder, James borrowed a car from his daughter Jana. He told her he was going to get the car serviced for her. When he returned the car the morning after the murder, the car had not been serviced, but Jana found a .22 caliber bullet on the floorboard of the car. Later that same day, James told Jana to never tell anyone that Brenda had asked him to kill Rob. He threatened to kill Jana if she told anyone. The prosecutors decided to try James Pavitt and Brenda Andrew in separate trials. James went to trial first in 2003. The prosecution showed all the evidence against him. They talked about his skills with guns. James had been in the army and had training as a sniper. They showed evidence of his affair with Brenda. They showed how he had tried to prevent Rob from removing Brenda as the beneficiary of the life insurance policy. The jury found James Pavitt guilty of first-degree murder. They sentenced him to death. Brenda's trial happened in 2004. Her trial was very different from James's trial. The prosecutors brought up a lot of information about Brenda's personal life that many people thought was not related to the murder. They brought several men to testify about having affairs with Brenda. They asked these men detailed questions about their sexual relationships with Brenda. They asked about where they had sex, how often they had sex, and what hotels they went to. The prosecutors also had witnesses describe what Brenda wore. They asked people to talk about her clothing from years before the murder. Witnesses said she wore tight dresses, short skirts, and low-cut tops. They said her clothes showed a lot of cleavage. They said she wore leather outfits. They called her clothing inappropriate and improper. The prosecutors found a book in Brenda's house called 203 Ways to Drive a Man Wild in Bed. They talked about this book during the trial. During closing arguments, the prosecutor held up underwear that had been found in Brenda's suitcase when she was arrested at the border. He showed the jury several pairs of thong underwear and lace bras. He suggested that no true grieving widow would pack such underwear and leave for Mexico with her boyfriend. In closing arguments, the prosecutor called Brenda a slut puppy. He said she was a bad wife, a bad mother, and a bad woman. The prosecution spent a lot of time talking about Brenda's sex life, her affairs, her clothing, and her behaviour as a mother. Many people later said this was unfair and had nothing to do with whether she murdered her husband. Despite all of this, there was also real evidence against Brenda. Teresa Sullivan testified about Brenda's alleged confession in jail. The evidence showed that Brenda's gunshot wound was from close range, not from across the garage like she claimed. The evidence showed she fled to Mexico instead of going to her husband's funeral. The evidence showed she had a motive because of the $800,000 life insurance policy. The evidence showed her story about the masked men did not match the physical evidence. The jury found Brenda Andrew guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. They found two aggravating factors. First, they found that the murder was committed for money. Second, they found that the murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. Based on these findings, the jury sentenced Brenda Andrew to death on the murder charge. They sentenced her to 10 years in prison and a $5,000 fine on the conspiracy charge. On September 22, 2004, the judge formally sentenced Brenda according to the jury's verdict. She became the only woman on Oklahoma's death row. She has been on death row ever since then. She has been in prison for over 20 years now. She has appealed her conviction many times. She has argued that her trial was unfair because of all the evidence about her sex life and her behaviour as a wife and mother. Over the years, several judges have agreed with Brenda that some of the evidence at her trial was unfair. Judge Arlene Johnson of the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals wrote that the evidence about Brenda's sex life had no purpose except to show that Brenda was a bad wife, a bad mother, and a bad woman. She said this evidence made the jury think Brenda's life had less value. Judge Robert Bacharach of the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals wrote a dissent, saying the prosecution focused on Brenda's sex life from start to finish. He said this portrayed Brenda as a scarlet woman and a modern Jezebel. He said it made the jury distrust her because of her morals. He said this took away any realistic chance that the jury would consider her version of events. In January 2025, the United States Supreme Court ordered a lower court to review Brenda's case again. The Supreme Court said the lower court needed to decide whether the irrelevant evidence about Brenda's sex life, gender presentation, demeanour, and motherhood made her trial fundamentally unfair. However, just a few days ago in January 2026, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals reviewed the case again and upheld Brenda's conviction and death sentence. The three judges said that while her trial was not perfect, it was fundamentally fair. They said the jury had overwhelming evidence of her guilt that was not related to her sexual conduct. James Pavitt is also still on death row. His sentence was briefly overturned in 2017, but it was reinstated in 2019. An inmate named Jayton Tyrone Wood once confessed to shooting Rob Andrew. but his confession was not taken seriously because it only contained information that was already public knowledge. Brenda Andrew remains in the Mabel Bassett Correctional Facility in McLeod, Oklahoma. James Pavitt is imprisoned at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma. Neither one has an execution date set. Brenda has spent 16 of her 20 years on death row in solitary confinement, meaning she has been alone in a cell with almost no contact with other people. Rob and Brenda's children, Tricity and Parker, were raised by their paternal grandparents in Enid. The money from Rob's $800,000 life insurance policy is being held in a trust for Tricity and Parker. They will receive it when they turn 35 years old. According to reports from years ago, the children cut off almost all communication with their mother. They are not on Brenda's list of approved visitors at the prison. Rob Andrew was 39 years old when he died. He left behind his parents, his 3 brothers, many other family members, friends, and co-workers. People who knew him said he was a good man who loved his children and his faith. His death devastated many people. His co-workers said they would never forget him. One friend said losing Rob was like losing one of her own children. The case of Brenda Andrew raises questions about fairness in trials, especially for women. Some people believe Brenda was judged more harshly because she did not act the way people expected a woman to act. They say the focus on her clothing, her sex life, and her mothering skills was unfair. They say a man on trial for murder would never be questioned about these things. Other people believe the evidence of her guilt was so strong that the sexual evidence did not matter. They point to her flight to Mexico, the staged gunshot wound, the motive of the insurance money, and the testimony of the jailhouse informant. Whatever people think about the fairness of her trial, the facts remain that Rob Andrew was killed in his own garage while picking up his children for Thanksgiving. 2 children lost their father. A man who was known for his kindness and optimism was shot to death by people he trusted. Whether Brenda Andrew deserves to be executed for her role in this crime, or whether she deserves a new trial, or whether the original verdict was correct, will continue to be debated as her case moves through the courts. But what cannot be debated is that a good man died, 2 children lost their father, and a family was destroyed by betrayal and violence on a November night in 2001. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to case number 2. Case number 2. Linda Anita Carti was a former elementary school teacher who had worked as an informant for the Drug Enforcement Administration. She was arrested in May 2001 and charged with a terrible crime. In February 2002, she was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. The crime she was convicted of was the kidnapping and killing of a young mother named Joanna Rodriguez. The prosecutors said Carti wanted to steal Rodriguez's newborn baby. Carti has spent more than 20 years on death row in Texas. She maintains that she is innocent. She says she was framed by drug dealers because of her work as an informant. Her case has drawn attention from around the world because she is a British citizen and because of questions about whether she received a fair trial. Linda Anita Carti was born on October 5, 1958, on the island of St. Kitts in the Caribbean. At that time, St. Kitts was a British colony, which means Linda was born with British citizenship. Her parents were from Anguilla, which was another British territory. Linda grew up in St. Kitts and was a good student. She was active in her community. She sang in the National Youth Choir. When Prince Charles visited St. Kitts, Linda gave a solo performance for him. After she finished school, Linda became an elementary school teacher. She taught young children at a primary school. People who knew her said she was passionate about teaching. She would hold extra classes for children who had special needs or who needed extra help. She also taught Sunday school at her church. She led a volunteer social work group. People in St. Kitts remembered her as someone who cared about helping others, especially children from low-income families. When Linda was still young, she had a relationship with a man and became pregnant. On September 10, 1979, she gave birth to a daughter named Javel. Shortly after Javel was born, the father left. He moved to New York and left Linda to take care of the baby alone. Linda raised Javel by herself for several years. In 1982, when Javel was about 2 years old, Linda moved to the United States. She brought her family with her and settled in Houston, Texas. This was a big change for Linda. She was moving from a small Caribbean island to a large American city. She enrolled at the University of Houston to study pharmacology. Pharmacology is the study of drugs and how they work in the body. While she was studying, Linda worked to support herself and her daughter. In 1988, something terrible happened to Linda. She was raped in a parking lot at the University of Houston. This rape resulted in a pregnancy. Linda felt deep shame about what had happened to her. She did not tell her family about the rape or the pregnancy. She hid it from everyone. On June 23, 1989, Linda gave birth to a baby girl. She gave this baby up for adoption because she felt she could not keep the child. 2 months before this baby was born, Linda's beloved father died. Linda was very close to her father, and his death devastated her. She was going through many difficult things all at once. The rape, the pregnancy, and the death of her father all happened within a short time. After these events, Linda found herself in an abusive relationship. She became a victim of domestic violence. Her life during this time was very difficult and painful. These traumatic experiences would later be important in her case, but her defense lawyers never presented this information to the jury at her trial. Around the late 1980s and early 1990s, Linda began working as a confidential informant for law enforcement. According to Linda, she started dating a man who turned out to be a drug dealer. She did not know he was involved in drugs at first. When law enforcement found out about her connection to this man, they approached her and asked her to work as an informant. Linda says she was given a background check and a code name. She underwent briefings from the Drug Enforcement Administration, known as the DEA. Her job was to get close to people who were suspected of trafficking drugs and pass information to the DEA. She would befriend suspected drug dealers and sometimes make test purchases of drugs while wearing a wire or recording device. This was dangerous work. If the drug dealers found out she was working for law enforcement, they could have hurt her or killed her. In 1992, Linda was convicted of 2 crimes. She was found guilty of auto theft and impersonating an FBI agent. For these crimes, she was sentenced to 10 years of probation. However, the condition of her probation was that she had to continue working as a drug informant for law enforcement. So Linda continued her work with the DEA. According to a DEA agent named Charlie Mathis who worked with her, Linda risked her life on several occasions while working undercover. He said she passed background checks and got paid for providing valuable tips. Over the years, her information led to arrests of drug dealers. Linda believed this work was important and that she was helping law enforcement fight crime. However, Linda says this undercover work also made her many enemies. Drug dealers and criminals in Houston knew or suspected that she was an informant. This put her in danger. Years later, Linda would claim that these enemies were the ones who framed her for murder. Linda eventually had a common law relationship with a man named Jose Corona. A common law husband is someone you live with as if you are married, even though you are not legally married. Linda and Jose lived together in an apartment complex called Sandy Glen on Westview Drive in Houston. The relationship between Linda and Jose had problems. They would argue and separate, then get back together. According to Jose and others who knew Linda, she had suffered several miscarriages over the years. A miscarriage is when a woman loses a baby during pregnancy. These miscarriages were painful for Linda, both physically and emotionally. In early May 2001, Jose moved out of the apartment he shared with Linda. Their relationship was falling apart. According to what Jose later told police and testified to in court, Linda would tell him she was pregnant in an effort to keep him from leaving. She would say she was pregnant, but then when he wanted to go to doctor appointments with her, she would say she lost the baby. This happened multiple times. Jose said Linda told him she was pregnant 3 or 4 different times, but none of these pregnancies were real. Prosecutors later argued that Linda was so desperate to keep Jose from leaving that she decided she needed to get a real baby to show him. Joanna Rodriguez was a young woman who lived in the same apartment complex as Linda. Joanna was only 20 years old. She had grown up in a small town in Guanajuato, Mexico. She and her husband, Raimundo Cabrera, had known each other since they were children in Mexico. They got married and moved to Houston. They had been married for about 2 years. Raimundo was 28 years old and worked hard to support his family. The couple lived in apartment number 36 at the Sandy Glen complex. They shared the apartment with Raimundo's cousin, Rigoberto Cardenas, who was 23 years old. Joanna became pregnant with their first child. Her family said she was excited and happy about becoming a mother, but also nervous as her due date got closer. She loved to laugh and enjoyed spending time with her extended family. On Sundays, the family would often gather at a neighborhood park. Around May 12, 2001, Joanna gave birth to a baby boy. They named him Ray Cabrera. Joanna and Raymundo were thrilled to be new parents. They brought baby Ray home to their apartment. The baby was healthy and perfect. Raymundo was saving money to buy a car for his family. He kept the cash in his apartment, in a jacket in the closet. He had saved between $700 and $1,000. Linda Carti lived in apartment number 38 at the same complex, very close to Joanna and Raymundo's apartment. Linda knew that Joanna and Raymundo were Latino, like Jose. Linda knew they had just had a baby, and the baby was also Latino. According to the prosecution, Linda came up with a plan. She decided she would take Joanna's baby and pretend it was hers. Because the baby was Latino, she could tell Jose the baby was his. She thought this would bring Jose back to her and save their relationship. On May 15, 2001, the day before the crime, Linda told several people she was pregnant and about to have a baby. She told her neighbour Florence Myers that she was pregnant and the baby would be born the next day. Florence later said that Linda did not look pregnant at all. Linda had a baby car seat in her car. She told Jose on May 15th that she would have a baby boy the next day. She also told an employee at a public storage facility named Sherry Bancroft that she had already had the baby and that the baby was at home with his father. Linda had rented a car. She also had access to her daughter Jovelle's car. According to the prosecution, Linda contacted 3 men she knew from her time working as an informant. Their names were Gerald Anderson, Chris Robinson, and Carlis Williams. All 3 men had criminal records. Chris Robinson had previously been convicted as a killer in a drive-by shooting. Linda told these men that there were drugs in an apartment in her complex. She said they could steal the drugs and money if they broke into the apartment. She promised them cash and drugs in return for doing this job. But what she really wanted was for them to kidnap Joanna and take her baby. In the early morning hours of May 16, 2001, around 1 a.m, 4 men broke into Joanna and Raymundo's apartment. 3 of the men were wearing ski masks. They kicked down the door. Joanna had only been home from the hospital for a few days. She was in bed with Raymundo and their baby Ray. The men burst into the bedroom with guns. They demanded money and drugs. Raymundo spoke very little English, but he understood they wanted money. He told them they could have whatever they wanted. He directed them to the closet where he kept the money he had saved to buy a car. The men found the cash and took it. The men ransacked the apartment, tearing through belongings looking for drugs and more money. They pistol-whipped Raymundo, hitting him in the head with their guns. They also beat Raymundo's cousin Rigoberto. They tied up both men with duct tape so they could not move or fight back. Then the men grabbed Joanna and baby Ray. They forced Joanna and the baby out of the apartment and into a car. Raymundo and Rigoberto were left tied up, injured and terrified. While the men were inside the apartment, one of them answered a cell phone. Raymundo heard the man say into the phone, "We are inside here. Do you want it?" Then the man yelled that she was outside and they needed to leave quickly. The prosecution later argued that she was Linda Carti and the phone call was to her, asking if she wanted them to take the baby. After the men left with Joanna and baby Ray, Rigoberto eventually managed to free himself from the duct tape. He then freed Raymundo. The 2 men ran to another apartment in the same complex where relatives lived. They called the police from there. Raymundo was desperate. His wife and newborn son had just been kidnapped. The police arrived and began investigating. They put out alerts to find Joanna and baby Ray. They started canvassing the apartment complex, talking to neighbours to see if anyone had seen or heard anything. When police interviewed neighbours, they spoke to Florence Myers, who lived in apartment 40. Florence told police about her strange conversation with Linda Carti the evening before. She said Linda had been sitting in her car in the parking lot. Florence stopped to talk to her. Linda told her she was pregnant and the baby would be born the next day. Florence saw a car seat in the back of Linda's car, but Florence thought it was strange because Linda did not look pregnant at all. When the police heard this, they became very interested in Linda Carti. The police contacted Linda and asked her to come talk to them. Linda agreed to meet with them voluntarily. During the interview, Linda told the police that she had rented a car and that her daughter Jovelle also had a car. She said these cars might have been used in the crime. She said she had loaned the cars to some men who might be involved. She told police where they could find the cars. She directed them to a house located in the 6000 block of Van Zant Street in northeast Houston. Police went to that location It was the home of a woman named Laura Gaydon, who was 91 years old. She was the grandmother of one of the men police were looking for. When police arrived, they searched the area around the house. In one car parked there, they found baby Ray. The 4-day-old infant was in the front seat of the car. He was alive and unharmed. The police were relieved to find the baby safe, but in the trunk of another car at the same location, they found Joanna Rodriguez. She had been bound with duct tape. Her mouth was taped shut. A plastic bag had been placed over her head and secured with tape. She had suffocated to death. The police also found baby clothes, baby blankets, and a diaper bag in the car. Joanna's body was taken to the medical examiner. An autopsy confirmed that she died from suffocation caused by the plastic bag over her head. The police arrested Linda Carti on May 16, 2001. They charged her with capital murder. They also arrested the 4 men who had been involved in the home invasion. Gerald Anderson, Chris Robinson, Carlis Williams, and another man were all taken into custody. The police found Linda's fingerprints in both cars where baby Ray and Joanna's body were found. The police also looked at cell phone records. These records showed that between 12:50 a.m. and 2:50 a.m. on May 16th, there were 11 phone calls between Linda's cell phone and a cell phone belonging to Gerald Anderson. 7 of those calls happened in just 5 minutes, between 1:09 a.m. and 1:14 a.m. This was right around the time of the home invasion. The prosecution argued that these calls showed Linda was in contact with the men during the crime, coordinating what they were doing. When Jose Corona arrived at the police station after Linda was arrested, he asked her if the baby had been born yet. Linda told him not yet. This was strange because if Linda had really been pregnant and about to give birth, she would have said the baby was born or that she was in labour. Instead, she said, "Not yet," which suggested she was still waiting for something to happen. Baby Ray was examined at Texas Children's Hospital. The doctors found that he was healthy and had not been hurt. He was returned to his father, Raimundo. Raimundo was heartbroken. He had his son back, but his wife was dead. He would now have to raise baby Ray without Joanna. The family held a funeral for Joanna. She was buried in her native Mexico, in the small town where she had grown up. Her family was devastated. They wanted justice for Joanna. Linda Carti was held in jail without bail while she waited for her trial. The state of Texas charged her with capital murder. In Texas, capital murder is a crime that can be punished by the death penalty. The prosecution decided to seek the death penalty in Linda's case. Linda was appointed a defense lawyer named Jerry Guerino. Guerino was a court-appointed attorney who was paid by the state to represent people who could not afford their own lawyer. Unfortunately, Guerino had a very poor reputation. Over his career, he represented many people in death penalty cases, and a very high number of his clients ended up on death row. Critics said he did not work hard enough to defend his clients. According to Linda, Guerino did almost nothing to prepare for her case. An investigator from his office spoke to Linda for the first time just a couple of weeks before her trial, and only for 15 minutes. Guerino himself did not meet with Linda until shortly before the trial started. Guerino later said he tried to talk to Linda, but she refused. Linda said the opposite. She said she tried many times to contact Guerino, but he refused to accept her calls or visit her. Linda said Guerino finally talked to her by bribing her with a chocolate bar, which she found ridiculous and insulting. Guerino requested and received state funding to travel to St. Kitts to interview witnesses who could testify about Linda's good character. If he had gone to St. Kitts, he would have found people who remembered Linda as a passionate teacher who helped children. He would have learned about her work in the community and the church. This information could have been presented to the jury as mitigating evidence, which is evidence that might convince a jury not to give someone the death penalty. But Guerino never made the trip. He never did this investigation. He left this critical testimony undiscovered. Guerino also never spoke to Jose Corona before the trial. Jose was called as a witness by the prosecution. In Texas, there is something called marital privilege. This means that a spouse has the right to refuse to testify against their husband or wife. Even though Linda and Jose were not legally married, they were common law spouses, which gave Jose this same right. But Guerino never explained this to Jose. If Jose had known he had the right to refuse to testify, he would never have testified. His testimony was damaging to Linda. Guerino's failure to interview Jose and explain his rights was a serious mistake. There was another major problem with Linda's case. Linda was a British citizen. Under international law, specifically the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations. When a foreign national is arrested and charged with a crime, the local authorities must notify that person's consulate right away. The authorities must also inform the person of their right to contact their consulate. The consulate can then help the person get appropriate legal representation and support. In Linda's case, the Texas authorities never notified the British consulate that a British citizen had been arrested and was being charged with capital murder. Linda was not informed of her right to contact the British consulate. Guérinot knew that Linda was from St. Kitts and was not a United States citizen, but he did nothing to correct this failure. He did not raise the issue that Linda's rights under international law had been violated. The British government only learned that Linda was British after she had already been convicted and sentenced to death. Paul Lynch, who was the British Consul General in Houston at the time, later said in an interview that if the consulate had been notified when Linda was first arrested, everything would have been different. He said the consulate would have been in touch with Linda within 24 hours. They would have made their position very clear to the Houston authorities that the British government opposes the death penalty. They would have worked to ensure Linda received appropriate legal representation. They could have secured pro bono lawyers, which are lawyers who work for free. They could have helped get crucial mitigating evidence about Linda's background from St. Kitts. Lynch believed this could have made a vital difference in the outcome of the case, especially in the sentencing phase. He said he believed Linda would not be facing the death penalty if the consulate had been involved from the beginning. Linda's trial began in February 2002, less than a year after the crime. The prosecution was led by two prosecutors named Connie Spence and Craig Goodhart. They presented their theory of the case to the jury. They said Linda had become obsessed with getting a baby to save her relationship with Jose Corona. They said she knew Joanna Rodriguez had just had a baby and lived nearby. They said Linda recruited 3 criminals to break into Joanna's apartment, claiming there were drugs there to steal, but the real goal was to kidnap Joanna and the baby. Then Linda needed Joanna dead, because Joanna knew what Linda looked like. If Joanna lived, she could identify Linda as the person behind the crime. The prosecution presented the cell phone records showing the calls between Linda and Gerald Anderson during the time of the crime. They presented evidence that Linda had told multiple people she was pregnant and about to have a baby, even though she was not pregnant. They presented Jose Corona's testimony about Linda's fake pregnancies and her attempts to keep him from leaving. They presented evidence that Linda's fingerprints were found in both cars. They showed that Linda was the one who told police where to find the cars, which suggested she had knowledge of the crime. The prosecution's star witness was Christopher Robinson, one of the men who had participated in the home invasion. Robinson testified that he saw Linda Carti put a plastic bag over Joanna Rodriguez's head, while Joanna was in the trunk of the car. He said Linda suffocated Joanna to death. His testimony was very powerful and damaging to Linda. The jury heard that one of the actual perpetrators was saying Linda had personally killed the victim. Linda maintained her innocence throughout the trial. She testified that she did not commit this crime. She said she was framed by the 3 men because of her work as a drug informant. She said these men knew she had worked for the DEA and they decided to set her up. She said they borrowed her rental car and her daughter's car without her permission and used them in the crime. She said the men were the ones who put the baby in one car and put Joanna's body in the other car. She said they did this to make it look like she was involved. However, the jury did not believe Linda's story. They believed the prosecution's version of events. On February 19, 2002, the jury found Linda Carti guilty of capital murder. The trial then moved to the punishment phase, where the jury had to decide if Linda should get the death penalty or life in prison. During the punishment phase, the prosecution presented more evidence. They showed that Linda had a prior conviction for auto theft and impersonating an FBI agent. They presented evidence questioning her credibility and character. The defense tried to show that Linda would not be a future danger to society and that there were mitigating circumstances that should spare her life. But because Guérinot had done so little preparation, he had very little mitigating evidence to present. The jury had to answer special questions to decide on punishment. One question was whether Linda actually caused the death of Joanna Rodriguez. The jury could also convict her if they found she intended to kill Joanna or if she anticipated that a human life would be taken during the crime. The jury decided yes on these questions. They found that Linda had caused Joanna's death or had intended for her to be killed. On February 21, 2002, the jury sentenced Linda Carti to death. When the judge imposed the sentence, Joanna Rodriguez's family cried and hugged each other. Raimundo Cabrera, Joanna's husband, said through an interpreter that he felt there was some justice. He said it helped him and he could rest a little better. Joanna's father, Ramon Rodriguez, said the sentence satisfied him, but it did not ease the family's grief. Nothing could bring Joanna back. Linda said that when the death sentence was handed down in the courtroom, it felt like a sharp pain running through her body. She felt betrayed by the government she had worked for and put her life on the line for over many years. Linda was taken to the Mountain View unit in Gatesville, Texas. This is where all women sentenced to death in Texas are held. Linda became the 8th woman on Texas death row at that time. The 3 men who actually committed the home invasion received much lighter sentences than Linda, even though they were the ones who physically carried out the crime. Gerald Anderson was sentenced to life in prison. Christopher Robinson was sentenced to 45 years in prison. Carlos Williams was sentenced to 20 years in prison. None of them received the death penalty, even though they had beaten people and kidnapped a woman and baby. The prosecution argued that Linda was the mastermind who planned the whole thing, which is why she deserved the harshest punishment. Linda's conviction was automatically appealed to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. This is standard in all death penalty cases in Texas. In 2004, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denied her appeal and upheld her conviction and sentence. Linda then appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. That appeal was also denied. She appealed to the United States Supreme Court. The British government filed an amicus brief supporting Linda's appeal. An amicus brief is when an outside party offers relevant information to help the court understand important issues in a case. The British government argued that the United States had violated international law by not notifying the British consulate of Linda's arrest. Despite this, the Supreme Court refused to hear Linda's case. But Linda did not give up. Years later, new information came to light that raised serious questions about her trial. In 2014, Christopher Robinson, the star prosecution witness, signed an affidavit saying that his testimony had been a lie. Robinson said that he did not actually see Linda Carti put a plastic bag over Joanna Rodriguez's head. He said that story was fabricated by the 2 prosecutors, Connie Spence and Craig Goodhart. Robinson said the prosecutors coached him before trial in a series of private meetings. He said when they were rehearsing, the prosecutors would stop him and add things or take things out. They would say, wait, this is what happened, and make him change his story. Robinson said the prosecutors threatened him. They told him that if he did not testify against Linda, he would be put on death row himself. Charlie Mathis, the retired DEA agent who had worked with Linda, also came forward with an affidavit. He said that prosecutor Connie Spence had threatened him. He said he was willing to testify that Linda was not a violent person and did not deserve the death penalty, but he felt intimidated by the prosecution. Linda's current lawyers discovered that the prosecutors had hidden at least 18 recorded witness statements from Linda's original defense team. These were statements that Robinson and others gave to police during the investigation. Over time, as Robinson was interviewed 11 different times, his statements against Linda became more and more damaging. It appeared that the prosecutors were working with him to build a stronger case, rather than just taking his honest account of what happened. The defense should have been given copies of all these statements before trial, but they were not. In a rare move, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals ordered a hearing in 2016 to review Linda's claims of prosecutorial misconduct. This hearing lasted several days. 4 witnesses testified that they had been coerced and threatened by the prosecutors. The prosecutors, Spence and Goodhart, denied making threats or hiding evidence. They said they had done nothing wrong. Linda's original defense attorneys testified at the hearing. They said they never received copies of the 18 recorded statements. One of them said he was incensed that the prosecutors would hide all these witnesses from them and then expect justice to be done and expect Linda Carti to get a fair trial. After the hearing, the judge had to decide whether to accept or reject Linda's claims of prosecutorial misconduct. Unfortunately, the judge ultimately ruled against Linda. Her appeals continued to fail. In November 2018, the United States Supreme Court denied her most recent petition. Linda remains on death row at the Mountain View unit. She has been there for over 20 years. She is now over 65 years old and a grandmother. Her daughter Javelle has 2 sons named Jory and Caden. For several years, Javelle was able to visit her mother in prison, but a few years ago, prison officials told Javelle that a new rule had been put in place. Children were no longer allowed to visit if the crime the person was convicted of involved children. Since Linda was convicted of a crime involving baby Ray, Javel's children could no longer visit their grandmother. This made the situation even harder for the family. Javel visits her mother once every 2 or 3 weeks for just 2 hours each time. They are not allowed to have physical contact. They can only talk through glass. Linda continues to maintain her innocence. In interviews from prison, she says she did not commit this crime. She says the person the Rodriguez family has hated for all these years is not the person who really killed Joanna. She says there is a murderer out there who got away with it. She says she wants to clear her name and show the families the truth. Linda is the only British citizen currently on death row in the United States. If she is executed, she will be the first British woman to be put to death in America since 1955. Her case has received significant attention in the United Kingdom. A documentary film was made about her case. There have been news stories in major British newspapers. Celebrities including Bianca Jagger have protested on her behalf. In 2009, a cardboard cutout of Linda appeared on the 4th plinth in Trafalgar Square in London as part of an art project highlighting injustice. The British government has continued to oppose Linda's death sentence. They maintain that the failure to notify the consulate was a serious violation of international law and treaty obligations between the United States and the United Kingdom. British officials have stated that they oppose the death penalty under all circumstances and believe Linda should not be executed. Supporters of Linda argue that she did not receive a fair trial. They point to her incompetent defence lawyer, who did almost no preparation for her case. They point to the failure to notify the British consulate. They point to the allegations of prosecutorial misconduct, including hiding evidence and coaching witnesses to lie. They point out that the actual perpetrators who beat people and kidnapped a woman and baby received lighter sentences than Linda. They argue that even if Linda was involved in planning the crime, she did not personally kill Joanna and should not receive the death penalty. Critics and prosecutors argue that Linda is guilty and deserves her sentence. They say the evidence against her is overwhelming. She told multiple people she was pregnant when she was not. She had a motive because she wanted a baby to keep her relationship with Jose. She had access to the cars used in the crime. Her fingerprints were in both cars. The cell phone records tie her to the perpetrators during the time of the crime. She directed police to where the cars were, showing she had knowledge of the crime. One of the perpetrators testified that he saw her put the bag over Joanna's head. The prosecutors maintain that Linda was the mastermind who planned the entire horrible crime. They say she needed Joanna dead because Joanna could identify her. The prosecutors described the crime as unspeakable evil. The case raises difficult questions. Was Linda Carti the mastermind behind a terrible crime who deserves to be executed? Or was she an informant who was framed by criminals she had helped put in prison? Did the prosecutors hide evidence and threaten witnesses to get a conviction? Did Linda's defense lawyer fail her so badly that she did not get a fair trial? Should international law and treaty obligations have protected Linda's rights? These questions continue to be debated. What is certain is that a young mother was killed in a horrifying way. Joanna Rodriguez was only 20 years old. She had just given birth to her first child. She had her whole life ahead of her. Instead, she was kidnapped from her home, tied up, and suffocated in the trunk of a car. Her baby son, Ray, who was only 4 days old, was taken from her. Ray survived and was returned to his father, but he will never know his mother. Raimundo lost his wife when she should have been experiencing the joy of new motherhood. He had to raise their son alone. Joanna's parents, siblings, and extended family lost a beloved daughter and cousin. The Rodriguez family buried Joanna in Mexico and have lived with this grief for over 20 years. Linda Carti sits on death row with no execution date set. She can be given an execution date at any point. If that happens, her lawyers will make final appeals trying to stop it. But unless something changes, Linda may eventually be executed by lethal injection for her role in Joanna Rodriguez's death, becoming the first British woman executed in the United States in almost 70 years. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to case number 3. Case number 3. Shadid Abdul Matin was an English teacher from the United States who worked at Ningbo University of Technology in Zhejiang Province, China. In April 2022, a Chinese court found him guilty of intentional homicide and sentenced him to death. The crime he was convicted of was the murder of a young woman named Chen Shijun. She was a student at the same university where Abdul Matin taught. The case drew significant attention in China and raised discussions about the treatment of foreign nationals in the Chinese justice system. Shadid Abdul Matin was born in the 1960s in Los Angeles, California. He was African American. He grew up in Southern California. Not much is publicly known about his early life or his childhood. He attended the University of Phoenix, which is an online university. At the University of Phoenix, he received an associate degree in human resources. An associate degree is a 2-year college degree, which is less than a 4-year bachelor's degree. Before he came to China, Abdul Matin worked as a salesman. He sold mobile phones and other communication equipment. This was his job in the United States before he decided to move to China to teach English. At some point, Abdul Matin married a Chinese woman. They had a son together. The marriage did not last and they got divorced before the events that led to his arrest. After his divorce, Abdul Matin was living in Ningbo and working as an English teacher. He had been teaching at Ningbo University of Technology since around 2016. This means he had been working at the university for about 5 years before the crime occurred. Ningbo University of Technology is located in Ningbo, which is a city in Zhejiang province on the eastern coast of China. The university teaches engineering and technology subjects. Many foreign teachers work in China teaching English to Chinese students. English is an important subject for Chinese students who want to study abroad or work in international business. Foreign English teachers are often hired by Chinese universities because they are native speakers of English. Chen Shijun was a young woman who was a student at Ningbo University of Technology. Different sources report her age slightly differently, but she was in her early 20s at the time of her death. She was studying engineering at the university. Chen was described by her family as a happy young woman who was focused on her studies. She had her whole life ahead of her. In early 2019, Shadid Abdul Matin met Chen Shijun. The exact circumstances of how they met are not entirely clear from public records, but they met through the university where he taught and she studied. When Abdul Matin met Chen, he was not honest with her about his personal situation. He told Chen that he was divorced and single. While it was true that he had been married before and was now divorced, sources indicate that he may not have been entirely truthful about all aspects of his personal life. Chen believed what Abdul Matin told her, and the two began a romantic relationship. Over time, Chen and Abdul Matin developed what appeared to be a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. However, as the relationship continued, Chen began to have doubts about whether she wanted to stay with Abdul Matin. By May 2021, more than 2 years after they first met, Chen decided she wanted to end the relationship. Starting in the second half of May 2021, Chen told Abdul Matin several times that she wanted to break up with him. She told him she did not want to continue their relationship anymore. Abdul Matin did not accept Chen's decision to end the relationship. Each time Chen said she wanted to break up, Abdul Matin refused. He would not agree to let her go. According to court documents and investigation reports, Abdul Matin also verbally threatened Chen. He made threats to try to intimidate her and make her stay in the relationship. Chen was frightened by these threats, but she continued to insist that she wanted to end things with him. For several weeks in May and into June 2021, this situation continued. Chen wanted to break up, but Abdul Matin would not accept it. He kept refusing her requests to end the relationship. He kept making verbal threats toward her. This created a tense and dangerous situation. On June 14, 2021, Abdul Matin contacted Chen and arranged to meet with her. He told her they needed to talk. They agreed to meet at a bus stop. The specific bus stop was located near the Qingshui-Chao intersection, on a sidewalk along Tongtu Road in Ningbo. This was in the Yinzhou district of the city. The meeting was scheduled for around 8 p.m. in the evening. Before leaving to meet Chen, Abdul Matin made preparations. He gathered certain items and brought them with him. Most importantly, he brought a folding knife. A folding knife is a knife where the blade can fold into the handle, making it easy to carry and conceal. Abdul Matin also brought some clothes with him. The fact that he brought a knife to this meeting would later be seen as evidence that he had planned what he was going to do. Abdul Matin arrived at the agreed-upon location around 8 p.m. Chen also arrived at the bus stop. The two met and presumably began talking. What exactly was said between them during this meeting is not publicly known, but it appears they discussed their relationship and Chen's desire to end it. The meeting took place on a sidewalk near the bus stop. There was a grove of trees alongside Shiji Avenue nearby. At some point during their meeting, Abdul Matin and Chen moved to or were near the grove of trees. This area was somewhat secluded, away from the main road and away from other people. The time was now approaching 9:48 p.m, almost 2 hours after they had first met. What happened next was brutal and violent. At approximately 9:48 p.m, Abdul Matin took out the folding knife he had brought with him. He attacked Chen with the knife. He stabbed her in the neck multiple times. He slashed at her neck with the knife, cutting her repeatedly. The wounds to her neck were deep and severe. They cut through blood vessels and caused massive bleeding. Chen tried to fight back or defend herself, but the attack was sudden and violent. She quickly lost the ability to resist because of the blood loss and the severity of her injuries. Even after Chen had lost the ability to fight back or resist, Abdul Matin continued his attack. He stabbed her in the face multiple times. He jabbed the knife into her face over and over. Witnesses and court documents later described that Chen had dozens of knife wounds on her face. One of Chen's parents later told investigators that when they were taken to identify their daughter's body, they almost fainted from the horror of what they saw. Their daughter had dozens of knife wounds on her face. One wound at the main artery in her neck was very deep. Chen died at the scene from the massive blood loss caused by the stab wounds. The medical cause of death was exsanguination, which means she bled to death. The stab wounds had severed major arteries in her neck, causing severe hemorrhaging that led to her death within minutes. She died in the grove of trees alongside Shiji Avenue. After killing Chen, Abdul Matin fled the scene. According to some reports, he was seen partially unclothed and attempting to destroy evidence. He tried to get rid of his bloodied clothing. However, the police were alerted quickly to what had happened. In the early morning hours of June 15, 2021, just hours after Chen was killed, police arrested Shadid Abdul Matin. When questioned by police, Abdul Matin told them that the reason for the killing was a relationship dispute with the victim. He confessed to the murder. He told investigators that he had killed Chen because of emotional issues and relationship problems. He admitted that the attack was motivated by his anger over her wanting to end their relationship. He described the assault as revenge for her breaking up with him. The police secured the crime scene to preserve evidence. They found the weapon that was used, the folding knife. They collected biological evidence, including blood and other traces. They took photographs of the scene and of Chen's body. They began a full investigation into what had happened. Chen's body was discovered by police in the wooded area near the bus stop early on June 15th. Her parents were contacted and asked to come to the police station. They were asked to identify their daughter's body. This was a traumatic experience for them. When they saw their daughter's body and the extensive injuries to her face and neck, they were devastated. Their daughter had been brutally murdered, stabbed dozens of times in a violent attack. The news of Chen Shijun's murder spread quickly in Ningbo and throughout China. The case drew significant attention on Chinese social media. Many people were outraged by the brutal nature of the crime. The fact that the person arrested was a foreign teacher working at a Chinese university added another layer to the public discussion. After Chen's death, her family wanted to go to Ningbo University of Technology to collect their daughter's belongings from her dormitory room or from the campus. However, the university initially refused to let them do this. University officials told the family that it would be a bad influence for the school. On June 18, 2021, family members went to the school anyway, but they were stopped by both school security and police. The school maintained that the incident happened outside the school and has nothing to do with us. This response by the university angered many people in China, who felt the school was not showing proper respect to the victim and her family. There were also reports that Ningbo University of Technology and officials worked to censor information about the case online. Messages posted by Chen's family members on Sina Weibo, which is a Chinese social media platform similar to Twitter, were removed. Videos and comments related to the murder case on the Chinese internet were also deleted. This attempt at censorship made many Chinese citizens even more angry about the case. On June 18, 2021, Hu Zijin, who was the editor-in-chief of the Global Times, a Chinese Communist Party-owned newspaper, posted on Weibo. He said that public opinion should avoid focusing on the criminal suspect's nationality and skin color, as this might cause international problems. However, many Chinese people felt strongly that Abdul Matin's status as a foreigner should not protect him from justice. They were concerned about what they called supranational treatment, which refers to the idea that foreigners in China sometimes receive special treatment or leniency that Chinese citizens would not receive. After Abdul Matin was arrested, people began looking into his background at the university. It emerged that there had been complaints about his behaviour toward female students before. According to online sources, Abdul Matin had a history of harassing female students at the school. He would send inappropriate messages to them on WeChat, which is a popular Chinese messaging app. The harassment got to the point where some female students were afraid to attend his English classes. This information led to questions about why the university had continued to employ him despite these complaints. People also discovered that Abdul Matin's teaching contract had expired in 2019. There were screenshots of chat conversations between Abdul Matin and Lily Liu, who was the director of the International Exchange College at Ningbo University of Technology. In these conversations about contract renewal, Lily Liu had insisted that Abdul Matin must stay at the university. In Chinese, she wrote that he must stay. After Chen's murder, people criticised the university for enabling Abdul Matin's misconduct and for renewing his contract despite the complaints about his behaviour. Lily Liu had written an article in 2014 about managing foreign teachers at universities. In this article, she made controversial claims about what should and should not be considered sexual harassment. She suggested that if foreign teachers asked female students about personal matters, like the colour of their underwear, this was not sexual harassment, but rather a cultural difference between China and the West. This view was heavily criticised after Chen's murder, as people felt it showed that the university administration did not take sexual harassment seriously and did not protect female students from inappropriate behaviour by foreign teachers. On July 23, 2021, the police completed their investigation into the murder. They forwarded their findings to prosecutors. On August 20, 2021, the Ningbo People's Procuratorate formally indicted Shadid Abdul Matin on charges of intentional homicide. Intentional homicide is the Chinese legal term for murder. The case was sent to the Ningbo Intermediate People's Court for trial. On November 25, 2021, the Ningbo Intermediate People's Court held a trial in the case. The trial was attended by officials from the United States Consulate General in Shanghai. Under international law and treaties, when a foreign national is charged with a serious crime in another country, their home country's consulate must be notified and given access to the person. The court provided Abdul Matin with an interpreter who could translate between English and Chinese, ensuring he could understand the proceedings. Abdul Matin was given the right to legal defence and had defence attorneys representing him. During the trial, both the prosecution and the defence presented evidence. The prosecution presented the evidence gathered by police during their investigation. This included the murder weapon, the biological evidence from the scene, witness statements, and Abdul Matin's own confession to police. The prosecution argued that Abdul Matin had committed premeditated murder, meaning he had planned to kill Chen before meeting her that night. The evidence that he brought a knife to the meeting supported this argument. The defence attorneys presented their case, though the details of the defence arguments are not fully available in public records. Abdul Matin had confessed to killing Chen, so the defence could not argue that he did not do it. The defence may have argued about the circumstances of the crime, or about factors that might reduce the sentence. On April 21, 2022, the Ningbo Intermediate People's Court announced its verdict. The court found Shadid Abdul Matin guilty of intentional homicide. The court issued a written statement explaining its decision. The statement said that Abdul Matin had deliberately and illegally taken another person's life, and his actions constituted the crime of intentional homicide. The court described Abdul Matin's crime in harsh terms. The court said that Abdul Matin committed a premeditated revenge killing. He stabbed and cut Chen's face and neck multiple times, causing her death. The court found that his motives were despicable. His criminal intent was resolute, meaning he was determined to carry out the murder. His means were cruel, referring to the brutal nature of the stabbing attack. The circumstances of the crime were particularly bad. The consequences were particularly serious, as a young woman had lost her life. For all these reasons, the court said Abdul Matin deserved the most severe punishment according to law. The court sentenced Shadid Abdul Matin to death. In China, the death penalty can be carried out by gunshot or by lethal injection, depending on the province. In Zhejiang province, where Ningbo is located, both methods are used. The sentencing hearing was held in a courtroom and was attended by more than 20 witnesses. These included members of the public and local Chinese Communist Party officials. The court announced that it had fully guaranteed Abdul Matin's rights to defence, access to an interpreter, consular visits, and other procedural rights in accordance with the law. The court also stated that it had notified the United States Embassy and consulates in China before the hearing and before announcing the sentence. When reached for comment by news organizations, a spokesperson from the United States Department of State said that they were aware of the court decision related to a United States citizen in China. The spokesperson said that United States officials were monitoring the situation. However, the spokesperson would not comment further due to privacy considerations. The United States government did not publicly advocate for clemency for Abdul Matin or criticize the Chinese court's decision. After being sentenced to death, Abdul Matin had the right to appeal the decision. Under Chinese law, death penalty cases are automatically reviewed. Abdul Matin's attorneys filed an appeal to the Zhejiang High People's Court, which is the higher court in Zhejiang province. On August 25, 2022, the Zhejiang High People's Court rejected Abdul Matin's appeal. The appeals court reviewed the case and issued a ruling. According to Chinese state broadcaster CCTV, the High People's Court of Zhejiang province found that the facts established by the Ningbo Intermediate People's Court were clear. The evidence was true and sufficient. The conviction was accurate. The sentence was appropriate. The trial procedure was lawful. Based on all of this, the appeals court upheld the original verdict and sentence. Abdul Matin's death sentence was confirmed. After the appeals court rejected Abdul Matin's appeal, the case was submitted to the Supreme People's Court of China. In China, all death sentences must be reviewed and approved by the Supreme People's Court before they can be carried out. This is the final step in the legal process for death penalty cases. The Supreme People's Court has three options when reviewing a death sentence. First, it can reduce the sentence to death with a 2-year reprieve, which means the person would not be executed immediately, but would serve time in prison instead. Second, it can reduce the sentence to a fixed-term prison sentence. Third, it can return the case to a lower court for further review. Fourth, it can uphold the sentence and order the execution to be carried out. As of the available information, the Supreme People's Court has not publicly announced its decision on Abdul Matin's case. However, organizations that monitor human rights and the death penalty in China have noted that the Supreme People's Court usually upholds death sentences in cases of murder, especially when the crime was particularly brutal and the defendant has confessed. If the Supreme People's Court upholds Abdul Matin's death sentence and orders his execution, he would be the first United States citizen to be executed in China since the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949. This has drawn attention from organizations that oppose the death penalty and from organizations that monitor the treatment of foreign nationals in Chinese custody. The Duihua Foundation, which is a human rights organization based in San Francisco that focuses on criminal justice issues in China, has been following Abdul Matin's case. In a statement released in September 2022, the organization noted that Abdul Matin was the only known United States citizen on death row in China at that time. The foundation critiqued the irreversible nature of capital punishment and noted that China carries out thousands of executions each year, far more than any other country in the world. However, the foundation did not contest Abdul Matin's guilt or the evidence that showed he committed intentional homicide. China does not publicly disclose how many people it executes each year, so the exact numbers are unknown. However, Amnesty International and other human rights organizations estimate that China executes more people than all other countries in the world combined. According to Amnesty International, China is the world's top executioner. Over the past few decades, several foreign nationals have been sentenced to death in China. Most of these cases involve drug trafficking crimes, which carry the death penalty under Chinese law. People from Uganda, South Korea, Japan, Kenya, and other countries have received death sentences for drug crimes in China. In 2016, the Nigerian Senate reportedly heard that 120 Nigerian citizens were on death row in China, most for drug offences. In 2019, China handed down a death sentence to a Canadian citizen named Robert Lloyd Schellenberg, who was accused of smuggling methamphetamine. This case caused international controversy and strained relations between China and Canada. Canada criticised the sentence as arbitrary and called it brutal. Schellenberg's appeal was denied in August 2021, but as of available information, his execution has not been carried out. The case of Shadid Abdul Matin is different from most foreign death penalty cases in China because it involves murder rather than drug trafficking. Murder cases often receive more sympathy from the public and international community than drug cases. However, in Abdul Matin's case, the brutality of the crime and the fact that he confessed to killing Chen meant that there was less international outcry or support for clemency compared to some other death penalty cases involving foreign nationals. The murder of Chen Shijun had a profound impact on her family. Her parents lost their daughter in a violent and senseless crime. Chen was in her early 20s, just starting her adult life. She was studying engineering and had plans for her future. All of that was taken away in a brutal attack. Her parents have had to live with the grief and trauma of losing their child and of seeing what was done to her. The image of their daughter's body covered in knife wounds is something that will haunt them forever. The case also had an impact on the community at Ningbo University of Technology and in the city of Ningbo. Students at the university, especially female students, felt frightened and unsafe. The fact that a teacher had killed a student was deeply disturbing. Questions were raised about campus safety, about the screening and monitoring of foreign teachers, and about how complaints of harassment are handled. The Chinese public followed the case closely on social media. Many people called for justice for Chen Shijun. They wanted to make sure that Abdul Matin would be punished according to Chinese law and would not receive special treatment because he was a foreigner. There was widespread anger about the university's initial response to the crime and about the reports that Abdul Matin had been allowed to continue teaching despite complaints about his behaviour. The case sparked broader discussions in China about the treatment of foreign teachers and foreign residents. Some people argued that foreigners in China receive preferential treatment and are not held to the same standards as Chinese citizens. This idea of supranational treatment became a topic of debate. Others argued that the legal system should treat everyone equally, regardless of nationality, and that Abdul Matin should receive the same punishment any Chinese person would receive for the same crime. Chinese law is clear that foreign nationals who commit crimes in China are subject to Chinese law and face the same punishments as Chinese citizens, except for those with diplomatic immunity or other legal exemptions. The court emphasised in its statements that Abdul Matin was given a fair trial with all appropriate legal protections, but that he would be punished according to Chinese law for his crime. For Shadid Abdul Matin, the consequences of his actions on June 14, 2021 have been severe. He threw away his freedom and his life when he decided to kill Chen Shijun. Whether he acted in a moment of rage or whether it was a premeditated act of revenge, the result was the same. A young woman died, and he will pay for that crime with his own life if the Supreme People's Court upholds his death sentence. Abdul Matin remains in custody in China, held in a facility while awaiting the final decision from the Supreme People's Court. His future depends on what that court decides. He could be executed by gunshot or lethal injection. He could have his sentence reduced to life imprisonment, but given the nature of the crime, the evidence against him, and his confession, most observers believe the death sentence will be upheld. The murder of Chen Shijun is a tragedy that destroyed multiple lives. Chen lost her life in a violent attack. Her parents lost their daughter. Abdul Matin will likely lose his life as punishment for his crime. The case serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of obsession, jealousy, and the refusal to accept when a relationship ends. It also highlights the importance of taking harassment complaints seriously and of protecting students from dangerous individuals, whether they are foreign nationals or not. Chen Shijun was a young woman with dreams and goals. She wanted to break up with someone who was not right for her. She had the right to make that choice. Instead of accepting her decision, Abdul Matin chose violence. He chose to take her life rather than let her go. That choice has defined the rest of his life and ended hers. The memory of Chen Shijun lives on with her family and with those who knew her. Her life mattered, and her death should not be forgotten. Justice for Chen means that her killer must face the full consequences of his actions under the law. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to case number 4. Case number Harry Wirowan was a teacher in Indonesia who committed terrible crimes against children. He was 36 years old when he was arrested. He lived and worked in the city of Bandung, which is the capital of West Java province in Indonesia. Bandung is located on the island of Java. Before his crimes were discovered, Harry Wirowan had taught Arabic language at an elementary school. He was known as a religious teacher who taught Islamic studies. People in his community saw him as someone who helped educate children about religion. In 2016, Harry Wirowan founded his own school. The school was called Madani Boarding School. The word pesantren is what Indonesians call Islamic boarding schools. A boarding school is a school where students live at the school instead of going home every day. They sleep in rooms at the school and stay there for weeks or months at a time. The Madani boarding school was for girls only, No boys attended this school. It was located in the Sibiru district of Bandung. Harry Wirowan set up his school in a way that would attract students from poor families. He offered scholarships to the girls. A scholarship means that the students did not have to pay money to attend the school. For many poor families in Indonesia, this was the only way their daughters could get an education. These families trusted that the boarding school would take care of their children and teach them to be good people. They believed their daughters would learn about religion and get a good education. They had no idea what was really happening at the school. The school building had 2 floors. Harry Wirowan's room was on the 1st floor. The girls' rooms where they slept were on the 2nd floor. The school was small, with only about 35 students in total. All of the students were girls between the ages of 11 and 16 years old. Because it was a boarding school, the girls lived there and only went home during holidays or special breaks. This meant Harry Wirowan had access to the students all day and all night. Indonesia is the world's biggest country with a Muslim majority. Most people in Indonesia are Muslim. The country has more than 25,000 Islamic boarding schools. Nearly 5 million students live and study in these boarding schools across Indonesia. For many children from poor families, these religious boarding schools are the only way to get an education. Parents send their children to these schools because they trust the teachers to guide their children in religion and help them become good people. Starting in 2016, the same year he founded the school, Harry Wirowan began raping the girls who were his students. He raped 13 different girls over a period of 5 years, from 2016 until 2021. The girls he raped were between 11 and 16 years old. They were children. Some of the girls were as young as 11 years old when he raped them. He raped them multiple times over several years. The court found that he raped them repeatedly and in a planned way. Harry Wirowan used his position as a teacher and the founder of the school to commit his crimes. He had complete power over the girls. He was the person in charge of the school. He was their teacher. He was supposed to protect them, guide them, and educate them. Instead, he hurt them in the worst possible way. He used different methods to manipulate and force the girls. According to the evidence presented at his trial, Harry Wirowan had specific ways of attacking the girls. He would start by asking a girl for a massage. He would then tell the victim that he could not have sex with his wife because she did not want to have many children. This was a lie he used to make the girls feel sorry for him or to confuse them. He also told the girls that as their teacher, he must be obeyed and respected. He used religious authority in his position as a teacher to make the girls think they had to do what he said. In Islamic culture, teachers are respected figures and students are taught to obey their teachers. Harry Wirowan twisted this cultural value to commit his crimes. If a girl resisted or tried to fight back, Harry Wirowan would tear off her clothes and force himself on her. He raped the girls in different locations. Sometimes he raped them at the school itself, either in his room on the 1st floor or in other areas of the school building. Sometimes he would tell a girl that they were going on a school field trip or to do something related to school, but instead he would take her to a hotel room and rape her there. He also rented apartments where he raped the girls. By taking them away from the school, he could assault them without the other students knowing what was happening. One victim, known only as N to protect her identity, later spoke about what happened to her. She said that the first time Harry tried to rape her, he told her they were going on a school field trip. He took her to a hotel instead. When they got to the hotel room, he tried to force himself on her. She fought back and caused a scene, and that time she managed to escape. But later, Harry raped her inside the school building. One night, when N and other girls were working on a school project late into the night, Harry called N into his room. That was when he first raped her. N said she was shocked and scared. She said she was scared every time he raped her after that. N was not alone. There were 13 girls who were raped by Harry Wirowan. At first, the girls did not know that other girls were being raped too. They were ashamed and scared, so they did not talk to each other about what was happening. But over time, the girls began to notice a pattern. Harry would take different girls on so-called field trips. When one girl was missing from the dormitory, the other girls started to realise that girl was probably with Harry. They began to understand that they were not the only victims. The girls put the pieces together and figured out that Harry was raping many of them, but they were still too afraid and ashamed to tell anyone outside the school. As a result of the rapes, 8 of the 13 girls became pregnant. 8 young girls, some as young as 11 or 12 years old, got pregnant because they were raped by their teacher. At least 9 babies were born from these rapes. One girl was raped so many times that she became pregnant twice and gave birth to 2 babies. Some reports suggest the number could be even higher. These girls were children themselves. They were supposed to be students learning and growing up. Instead, they became mothers because they were raped by the man who was supposed to be teaching them. When one of the girls told Harry Wirowan that she was pregnant, he told her she did not need an abortion. He said he would take responsibility for the baby. This was another lie. He made promises to the girls to keep them quiet. He told different girls different lies. He promised some girls that he would pay for their education. He told at least one victim that he would marry her. All of these were lies designed to keep the girls from reporting him to the police or telling their parents. He wanted them to keep his crimes secret. The crimes continued for 5 years. From 2016 to 2021, Harry Wirowan raped these girls over and over again. During all this time, no one knew what was happening. The girls were too scared and ashamed to tell anyone. They feared no one would believe them. They feared they would get in trouble. They feared for their futures. Many victims of rape feel shame, even though they did nothing wrong. The girls carried this terrible secret for years. The truth finally came out in May 2021. One of the victims went home for a holiday visit. When she got home, she told her parents that she had just given birth to a baby. Her parents were shocked and horrified. They had sent their daughter to what they thought was a safe religious school to get an education. Now their teenage daughter had just given birth. They immediately asked her what had happened. When the girl told them that her teacher, Harry Wirowan, had raped her, the parents went straight to the police. The West Java police began investigating the case after the parents filed their report in May 2021. As the police investigated, they discovered that there were not just one victim, but 13 girls who had been raped. They learned about the other pregnancies and the babies that had been born. The scale of the crimes shocked the investigators. This was not a single incident, but a pattern of abuse that had gone on for 5 years. Harry Wirowan was arrested in May 2021. Once he was in custody, the police continued their investigation to gather all the evidence. They interviewed the victims. They interviewed other people connected to the school. They collected physical evidence. The investigation took several months. The police made a decision not to tell the public about the case right away. They kept the investigation quiet from May 2021 until November 2021. The police said they did this to protect the victims. They said they wanted to prevent further psychological and social damage to the girls who had been raped. In Indonesia, as in many countries, victims of sexual violence often face shame and judgment from society. The police wanted to protect the girls' identities and give them time before the case became public news. The case became public in November 2021 when the court proceedings began. The news shocked the entire nation of Indonesia. People could not believe that a teacher at a religious school had raped 13 young girls and gotten 8 of them pregnant. The case drew massive public attention. People were outraged. They demanded justice for the victims. Many people began questioning how this could have happened and why no one had noticed for 5 years. On August 20th, 2021, the Ningbo People's Procuratorate formally indicted Harry Wirowan. The indictment is the official document that formally charges someone with a crime. He was charged with multiple counts of rape and with violating Indonesia's child protection law. Indonesia has laws specifically designed to protect children from sexual violence. The trial was held at the Bandung District Court. The trial took place over several sessions. The court heard testimony from 21 witnesses. These witnesses included the victims themselves, medical experts, and other people who had information about the case. During the trial, Harry Wirowan pleaded guilty. He admitted that he had raped the girls. He apologized to his victims and to their families. He asked for leniency. He said that he wanted to be allowed to raise his children, claiming that he had raped the girls in moments of weakness. His apology and his excuses did not change the facts of what he had done. The prosecutors asked the court to sentence Harry Wirowan to death. They also asked that he be chemically castrated. Chemical castration is a medical procedure that uses drugs to reduce a person's sex drive. The Indonesian government had passed a regulation in 2020, signed by President Joko Widodo, that allowed for chemical castration of people convicted of child rape. The prosecutors believed that Harry Wirowan deserved the most severe punishment possible. They said that such a harsh sentence was necessary to prevent similar crimes from happening in the future. On February 15, 2022, the three-judge panel at Bandung District Court announced their verdict. They found Harry Wirowan guilty of intentional rape of 13 students. The judges found that he had raped the girls repeatedly and in a planned, systematic way over a period of 5 years. They found that he had sexually groomed the girls, which means he had manipulated them psychologically to make it easier to abuse them. They found that 8 of the victims had become pregnant, and some had suffered injuries from the rapes. The presiding judge was Johannes Purnomo Suryo Ali. In announcing the verdict, Judge Ali explained the court's reasoning. He said that Harry Wirowan had deliberately committed violence and forced himself sexually on more than one victim repeatedly. The judge said that as a teacher and caretaker of the boarding school, Harry Wirowan should have protected, guided, and educated the children who were studying at his school. Instead, he set a bad example and destroyed the futures of the children under his care. However, the court did not give Harry Wirowan the death penalty that the prosecutors had requested. Instead, they sentenced him to life in prison. The judges decided against chemical castration as well. The court explained that under Indonesian law, a person sentenced to death or life imprisonment cannot be given additional punishments like chemical castration, except for the loss of certain rights. The judges said the life sentence was not meant as revenge against Harry Wirowan, but was aimed at protecting the public from similar crimes in the future. The court also made decisions about compensation for the victims. They ordered the Ministry of Women's Empowerment and Child Protection to pay a total of 331 million rupiah to the victims. This is equal to about $23,200. Additionally, the court ordered that each girl should receive between $600 and $6,000 for medical and psychological treatment. The court recognized that the girls would need ongoing medical care and therapy to help them recover from what had happened to them. The court also ruled that the 9 children who had been born as a result of the rapes should be placed in the temporary custody of the Ministry of Women's Empowerment and Child Protection. These babies needed to be cared for, and the teenage mothers needed help. The government would take care of the children while the victims received support. Many people in Indonesia were disappointed with the life sentence. They felt it was not harsh enough for someone who had raped 13 children and destroyed so many lives. The Indonesian prosecutors agreed. Even though they had won a conviction and a life sentence, they believed Harry Wirowan deserved the death penalty. Indonesian law allows prosecutors to appeal a sentence if they believe it is too lenient. The prosecutors decided to appeal the life sentence. Both the prosecutors and Harry Wirowan's lawyers had 7 days after the verdict to decide whether to appeal. The prosecutors filed an appeal asking the higher court to change the sentence to death. They argued that Harry Wirowan's crimes were so terrible that he should receive the ultimate punishment. The appeal went to the Bandung High Court. This is a higher court than the district court where the original trial was held. On Monday, April 4, 2022, the Bandung High Court announced its decision. The High Court agreed with the prosecutors. Chief Judge Heri Swantoro announced that they were accepting the prosecutor's appeal and changing the sentence from life imprisonment to death. The judge explained the High Court's reasoning in a statement released on the court's website. The statement said that what Harry Wirowan had done had caused trauma and suffering to the victims and their parents. The defendant had tarnished the reputation of Islamic boarding schools. The crimes were so serious and harmful that the death penalty was appropriate. The High Court also ruled that Harry Wirowan's assets should be seized. This included the school building, a foundation he owned, and any other property. These assets would be auctioned off, and the money would be used to benefit the victims and their children, including paying for the children's education. Harry Wirowan was not present in court when the High Court announced the death sentence. A court spokesperson confirmed this. His lawyer, Ira Margarita Mambo, said she needed to receive the full official ruling before commenting. She later said she would advise her client to appeal the death sentence to the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in Indonesia. According to Indonesian law, Harry Wirowan had 7 days from the date of the High Court ruling to file an appeal to the Supreme Court. In August 2022, his lawyers filed that appeal. They asked the Supreme Court to overturn the death sentence and return it to life imprisonment. The case then went to Indonesia's Supreme Court for final review. All death penalty cases in Indonesia must be reviewed by the Supreme Court. This is the final step in the legal process. The Supreme Court can uphold the death sentence, reduce it to a lesser sentence, or send the case back to a lower court for further review. The Supreme Court reviewed Harry Wirowan's case over several months. In December 2022, a 3-member panel of Supreme Court judges led by Chief Justice Sri Murwahuni, made their decision. They rejected Harry Wirowan's appeal. The decision was announced publicly on January 4, 2023. The Supreme Court ruling stated that the facts found by the Bandung Intermediate People's Court were clear. The evidence was true and enough to prove the charges. The conviction was accurate. The sentence was appropriate. The trial procedure was lawful. For all these reasons, the Supreme Court upheld the death sentence. This meant that Harry Wirowan's legal options were essentially exhausted. Under Indonesian law, he had one final possible avenue. He could request a judicial review, but only if he had new evidence that had not been presented before. His lawyer, Ira Margaretha Mambo, said she had not yet received the official statement from the Supreme Court at the time the decision was first announced. She said she would get the official documents and then decide on next steps. With the Supreme Court upholding the death sentence, Harry Wirowan became one of the people on death row in Indonesia. Indonesia uses execution by firing squad as its method of capital punishment. This method has been used in Indonesia since 1964 and has not changed. However, Indonesia has not actually carried out any executions since 2016. The country has held off on conducting executions for several years, even though courts continue to hand down death sentences. The case of Harry Wirowan had a huge impact on Indonesia. President Joko Widodo, who is often called Jokowi, paid special attention to the case. A government minister confirmed that the president was following the case closely. In January 2022, before the initial trial verdict, President Widodo publicly said he was concerned about cases of sexual abuse in Islamic boarding schools. He called on the Indonesian parliament to speed up work on a bill designed to prevent sexual violence. The case highlighted serious problems with child protection in Indonesia's education system. Indonesia's Child Protection Commission reported that in 2021, 14 out of 18 sexual abuse cases involving children took place in Islamic boarding schools. This means that the vast majority of reported child sexual abuse in educational settings was happening at religious schools. The Ministry of Women's Empowerment and Child Protection recorded that 8,730 children were victims of sexual violence in Indonesia in 2021. These numbers showed that child sexual abuse was a widespread problem in Indonesia, not just an isolated incident. After Harry Wirowan's arrest, more cases of sexual abuse at Islamic boarding schools came to light. People who had been too afraid to report abuse before were now coming forward. In one case, police arrested a 47-year-old teacher in Mamuju, a city in West Sulawesi province, for allegedly sexually assaulting 7 female students. Students had told their parents about the abuse, and the parents went to the police. This happened in the weeks after Harry Wirowan's case became public. Government officials began calling for reforms. Deputy Religious Affairs Minister Zainat Tauhid Saadi said the government was concerned about sexual abuse in Islamic boarding schools. He called on Parliament to review the law on pesantren that had been passed in 2019. The current law did not have proper provisions for monitoring and oversight of these schools. Zainat said the law needed to be changed to allow tighter government monitoring of boarding schools to protect students. Wariono Abdul Ghafur, who is the Director of Early Education and Islamic Boarding School at the Religious Affairs Ministry, said the death sentence for child rape represented a firm stance by the judges. He said he hoped the sentence given to Harry Wirowan would become an important lesson to prevent similar crimes from happening again. Not everyone agreed that the death penalty was the right punishment. Indonesia's National Commission on Violence Against Women, known as Komnas Perempuan, opposes the death penalty on principle. Commissioner Siti Aminah Tardi pointed out that there have been other death penalty sentences given to people before Harry Wirowan, which shows that the death penalty does not actually stop these crimes from happening. She said this proves the death penalty does not have a real effect in stopping people from committing rape. She urged the public to focus less on Harry's death sentence and more on the recovery of his victims. Human rights organisations also had mixed reactions. Indonesia's National Human Rights Commission, known as Komnas HAM, opposes the death penalty in all cases. They said the death penalty was not an appropriate punishment, even for someone like Harry Wirowan. However, other activists disagreed. Azas Tigor Nainggolan, an activist from the Legal and Human Rights Desk at the Indonesian Bishops' Conference, said the death sentence aims to end the crime and serve as a way to scare other potential offenders. He said Harry Wirowan's case was gross, and all sexual crimes are gross, which is why the judges wanted the death penalty. The victims of Harry Wirowan have had to deal with terrible consequences from what he did to them. They were raped repeatedly as children. 8 of them became pregnant and gave birth to babies while they were still children themselves. They have had to deal with the physical pain of rape and childbirth at young ages. They have had to deal with the emotional trauma of being betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect them. They have had to deal with raising children or watching their children be raised by others. They have had to testify in court about what happened to them. They have had to live with the shame and stigma that unfortunately still exists for victims of sexual violence in many societies. The Indonesian Witness and Victim Protection Agency, known as LPSK, said that the original life sentence was the harshest sentence ever handed down by an Indonesian court for a sexual offender up to that time. When the sentence was later changed to death, it became even more significant. The deputy chairperson of LPSK, Livia Iskandar, said they hoped this could act as a warning to other sexual offenders. She also noted that more child victims had applied for protection in 2021 compared to previous years, suggesting that more victims were coming forward. The Madani boarding school was shut down in 2021 after Harry Wirowan's arrest. The school had been operating for 5 years, from 2016 to 2021. During that time, it had about 35 students. After the truth came out, the school could no longer operate. The government investigated and found that Madani boarding school was not properly authorised. The Ministry of Religious Affairs had not issued an official operating permit for the school. An official named Teddy Ahmad Junaidi explained that Madani was more of a Rumah Tahfidz, which is a non-formal Islamic religious education institution that focuses on studying the Quran. It was listed as part of another school called Pesantren Manarul Huda in the Antapani district, but on its own, it did not have the proper permits to operate as a formal school. This raised questions about oversight. How could a school operate for 5 years without proper permits? How could such terrible abuse go on for 5 years without anyone noticing or stopping it? These questions led to calls for better regulation and monitoring of Islamic boarding schools across Indonesia. Harry Wirowan was also suspected of other crimes beyond rape. Investigators looked into whether he had misused money that was supposed to go to the school and the students. He had used the female students and the babies born from his rapes to attract sympathy from donors. He would tell people about poor students who needed help, and people would donate money thinking they were helping educate poor girls. Instead, Harry Wirowan may have been keeping that money for himself, while using the students' suffering to get more donations. The case brought attention to how people in positions of religious authority can abuse that authority. Harry Wirowan used religious symbols and religious teachings to manipulate his victims. He told them they had to obey him because he was their teacher. In Islamic culture, and in many cultures around the world, teachers are respected figures. Students are taught to listen to teachers and obey them. Harry Wirowan twisted this cultural value to make the girls think they had no choice but to do what he said. He used religion as a weapon against them. The prosecutor in the case, Asep Nana Mulyana, specifically pointed this out during the trial. He said Harry Wirowan had used religious symbols to manipulate his victims and as a justification for his evil deeds. This was especially harmful because the girls and their families had trusted him because of his religious role. They believed he was a good person because he taught about religion. For the families of the victims, the case has been devastating. They sent their daughters to what they thought was a safe place, where their children would learn and grow. Instead, their daughters were raped and some became pregnant. The parents had to learn that their trust had been betrayed in the worst possible way. They had to watch their daughters suffer. They had to help their daughters deal with the aftermath of rape and unwanted pregnancies. Some of them are now helping to raise grandchildren who were born from rape. The case also affected how people in Indonesia view religious schools. Many parents became more worried about sending their children to boarding schools. Schools that had done nothing wrong suffered from the negative publicity because people were scared. This led to discussions about how to rebuild trust, while also making real reforms to protect children. For Harry Wirowan himself, he faces execution. Indonesia uses firing squad as its method of execution. If and when his execution is carried out, he will be taken to a location where a team of shooters will shoot him. However, as mentioned earlier, Indonesia has not carried out any executions since 2016. There are currently many people on death row in Indonesia, waiting to see if their sentences will be carried out. It is not clear when or if Harry Wirowan will actually be executed. The case remains significant in Indonesian history as one of the most serious child sexual abuse cases ever prosecuted in the country. It exposed serious problems with child protection in religious boarding schools. It led to calls for legal reforms and better oversight. It showed the need for better education about sexual abuse and better systems for children to report abuse when it happens. The 13 girls who were raped by Harry Wirowan will carry the effects of what happened to them for the rest of their lives. Some of them have children who will grow up knowing they were born from rape. These children will need support and care. The victims themselves will need ongoing therapy and support to heal from the trauma. Society will need to do better at protecting children and supporting survivors of sexual violence. The case of Harry Wirowan is a reminder that people in positions of trust and authority can sometimes be the most dangerous. Teachers, religious leaders, coaches, and others who work with children have a special responsibility to protect them. When they violate that trust, the harm is especially terrible. Indonesia and countries around the world must work to prevent such abuse and to support victims when it does occur. As of now, Harry Wirowan remains in custody, awaiting possible execution. His death sentence has been upheld by the highest court in Indonesia. The victims continue their healing process. The 9 children born from the rapes are growing up, cared for by family members or by the Child Protection Agency. The case continues to influence discussions about child protection, religious school oversight, and sexual violence in Indonesia. The story of what happened at Madani boarding school between 2016 and 2021 serves as a warning and a call to action to protect vulnerable children from those who would abuse positions of power and trust. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the final case of the video, case number 5. Shadid Abdul was the principal of an Islamic school in Bangladesh. He was a teacher and the head of the Somagazi Islamia Senior Fazil Madrasa, which is an Islamic seminary located in the Feni district of Bangladesh. In October 2019, a court in Bangladesh sentenced him to death, along with 15 other people, for the murder of one of his students, a 19-year-old woman named Nusrat Jahan Rafi. The case shocked Bangladesh and drew international attention to the issues of sexual harassment and violence against women in the country. Nusrat Jahan Rafi was 19 years old. She was a student at the Somagazi Islamia Senior Fazil Madrasa in Feni, which is a small town located about 100 miles southeast of Dhaka, the capital city of Bangladesh. The madrasa is an Islamic religious school. In Bangladesh, there are around 20,000 madrasas that educate students, mostly from poor and rural families. These schools teach Islamic studies along with other subjects. Many families send their children to madrasas because they provide education to students who cannot afford other schools. Nusrat was a good student who took her education seriously. She lived with her family in Feni. Her father was AKM Musa Manik. She had a brother named Mamadul Hassan Noman, who was very close to her. Nusrat came from a family that supported her and believed in her right to get an education. They trusted the madrasa to provide her with a safe place to learn. Shadid Abdul, whose name is also sometimes written as S.M. Shadid Abdul or Shadid Abdul, was the principal of the madrasa. As the principal, he was the person in charge of the school. He was responsible for the students and the teachers. Students and their families were supposed to be able to trust him. Parents sent their daughters to the school believing that the principal would protect them and help them learn. Instead, Shadid Abdul betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. In March 2019, something happened that would change Nusrat's life forever. According to Nusrat and the complaint she filed, Principal Shadid Abdul called her into his office at the madrasa. When she went into his office, he touched her inappropriately. He sexually harassed her. This was not acceptable behaviour. It was wrong. It was a violation of Nusrat's safety and dignity. It was especially terrible because Shadid Abdul was in a position of authority over her. He was supposed to protect students, not harm them. After this happened, Nusrat made a very brave decision. She decided to report what had happened to her. This was not an easy choice. In Bangladesh, as in many countries around the world, women and girls who report sexual harassment or sexual violence often face serious consequences. They may be blamed for what happened to them. They may be judged by their communities. They may face harassment or even violence. Many women choose not to report sexual harassment because they fear what will happen to them if they speak up. But Nusrat decided to fight for justice. On March 27, 2019, Nusrat went to the local police station in Feni to file a complaint. She told the police that Principal Shadid Abdul had sexually harassed her. She said he had touched her inappropriately in his office. She wanted the police to take action against him. She wanted justice. There was a video that was leaked showing Nusrat at the police station filing her complaint. In the video, the local police station chief can be seen registering her complaint. However, his response was deeply troubling. The police chief dismissed her complaint, saying it was not a big deal. This response shows the kind of attitude that makes it so difficult for women to report sexual harassment in Bangladesh. Even when they find the courage to come forward, they are often not taken seriously. They are told that what happened to them does not matter. This treatment discourages other women from reporting harassment and assault. Despite the police chief's dismissive attitude, Nusrat's complaint was officially filed. The complaint named Shadid Abdul as the person who had harassed her. Because a formal complaint had been made, the police had to take some action. Shadid Abdul was arrested on suspicion of sexual harassment. He was taken into custody and put in jail while the investigation continued. Nusrat's family supported her decision to report the harassment. This was very important. In many cases in Bangladesh, families pressure women and girls not to report sexual harassment because they worry about the family's reputation or because they fear retaliation. But Nusrat's parents and her brother Mahmudul stood by her. They believed her. They wanted justice for what had happened to her. Her brother Mahmudul would later say that the whole country had seen what happened to his sister, that she was an innocent girl who was brutally murdered for her strong stance against wrongdoing. However, Nusrat's courage in speaking up would cost her everything. Once Shadid Abdul was in jail, he did not accept responsibility for his actions. He did not apologize. Instead, he decided to silence Nusrat permanently. From inside the jail, Shadid Abdul began planning to have Nusrat killed. According to police investigations led by Senior Police Superintendent Mohammed Iqbal and spokesman Banaj Kumar Muzumdar, Shadid Abdul contacted people outside the jail and told them to put pressure on Nusrat to withdraw her complaint. If she refused to withdraw the complaint, he told them to kill her. He ordered her murder from prison. He used his connections and his influence to organize a conspiracy to have a 19-year-old student murdered because she had dared to report that he had sexually harassed her. The people Shadid Abdul recruited to carry out the murder included several different individuals. Some were other teachers at the madrasa, some were students at the school, some were local politicians who had connections to the ruling Awami League political party. In total, 16 people would eventually be charged with participating in the murder plot. Among those who participated were two politicians from the Awami League, Ruhul Amin and Maqsood Alam, who was also known as Maqsood. These were men with power and influence in the local community. There were also teachers from the madrasa who helped organise the plot. Several students from the school were also recruited to participate. One of the students was a classmate of Nusrat's, named Sultana Poppy, who would play a key role in luring Nusrat to her death. The plan that Shadid Abdul and his co-conspirators came up with was elaborate and cruel. They wanted to kill Nusrat in a way that would look like suicide. They did not want it to be obvious that she had been murdered. They thought if they could make it look like she had killed herself, they would get away with the crime. On April 6, 2019, 11 days after Nusrat had filed her police complaint against Shadid Abdul, the plot was put into action. Nusrat came to the madrasa that day to take an exam. She was there as a student, trying to continue her education despite everything that had happened. She had every right to be there. She had every right to feel safe at her school. When Nusrat arrived at the school, her classmate, Sultana Poppy, approached her. Poppy was one of the conspirators. She had agreed to help lure Nusrat into the trap. Poppy told Nusrat to come with her. She lured Nusrat out of her classroom and led her up to the roof of the madrasa building. Nusrat trusted Poppy because they were classmates. She had no reason to think she was walking into danger. When Nusrat reached the rooftop, she found 4 or 5 people waiting for her. These people were wearing burqas. A burqa is a long, loose garment that covers the entire body, including the face. In Bangladesh and other Muslim-majority countries, burqas are traditionally worn by women. However, in this case, the people wearing burqas were men and women who were trying to hide their identities. By wearing burqas, they hoped that Nusrat would not be able to identify them. Once Nusrat was on the roof, the people in burqas surrounded her. They began pressuring her to withdraw her sexual harassment complaint against Principal Shadid Abdul. They told her she needed to take back what she had said. They wanted her to go to the police and say that her complaint was false that nothing had happened. They wanted her to let Siraj Abdullah go free, without facing any consequences for what he had done. Nusrat refused, even though she was surrounded by people who were clearly trying to intimidate her. Even though she must have been frightened, she stood her ground. She would not withdraw her complaint. She would not lie and say that nothing had happened. She insisted that she was telling the truth about what Siraj Abdullah had done to her. She wanted justice. Because Nusrat refused to withdraw her complaint, the conspirators moved forward with their plan to kill her. They grabbed her and restrained her. They tied her hands and feet with a scarf so she could not fight back or escape. Then they gagged her so she could not scream for help. Once she was restrained and unable to defend herself, they poured kerosene all over her body. Kerosene is a flammable liquid that is commonly used as fuel in Bangladesh. Then they set her on fire. Nusrat was burned alive on the rooftop of her own school, the place where she should have been safe. The people who killed her wanted it to look like she had committed suicide by setting herself on fire. This was their plan. They thought that if it looked like suicide, no one would investigate. They thought they would get away with murder. But their plan did not work the way they expected. The scarf they had used to tie Nusrat's hands and feet caught fire and burned. When the scarf burned, it freed her hands and feet. Even though she was engulfed in flames, even though she was in terrible pain, Nusrat managed to get free. She was able to move. She staggered down the stairs from the rooftop while she was still on fire. She was trying to get help. She was trying to save her own life. People saw Nusrat coming down the stairs covered in flames. They rushed to help her. They were able to put out the fire, but Nusrat had already been terribly burned. She had suffered burns to 80% of her body. Her injuries were catastrophic. She was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Even though Nusrat was gravely injured and in terrible pain, she knew that she might not survive. She wanted to make sure that the people who had done this to her would be caught and punished. So in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, Nusrat gave a statement. Her brother Mahmudul was with her, and he filmed her statement on his mobile phone. In the video, Nusrat, barely alive and suffering from burns over most of her body, identified some of the people who had attacked her. She said, "The teacher touched me. I will fight this crime till my last breath." These were incredibly brave words from a young woman who was dying. Even in her final moments, she was fighting for justice. She was determined that her attackers would not get away with what they had done to her. Nusrat's injuries were too severe for doctors to save her. She fought for her life for 4 days, but on April 10th, 2019, she died from her injury. She was only 19 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. She should have been continuing her education, making plans for her future, spending time with her family and friends. Instead, she was dead because she had dared to speak up about being sexually harassed. The news of Nusrat's death sparked outrage across Bangladesh and around the world. People could not believe that a young woman had been burned to death for reporting sexual harassment. The brutality of the crime, the fact that it had been ordered by a school principal, and the fact that so many people had participated in it, shocked the nation. Protests erupted across Bangladesh. Thousands of people took to the streets demanding justice for Nusrat. They wanted the people responsible for her death to be arrested and punished. The case drew so much attention that Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina herself made a statement about it. She vowed that none of the culprits will be spared legal action. She promised that the case would be fast-tracked and that justice would be served quickly. This was an unusual promise in Bangladesh, where criminal cases often take many years to go through the court system. The police launched a full investigation into Nusrat's murder. The Police Bureau of Investigation, PBI, which handles serious crimes, took over the case. The investigation was led by senior officers including Mohammed Iqbal and Banaj Kumar Muzumdar. They worked to identify everyone who had been involved in planning and carrying out the murder. The investigation revealed a widespread conspiracy. It was not just 1 or 2 people who had killed Nusrat. It was 16 people working together. The investigation showed that Principal Siraj Abdullah, even though he was in jail, had orchestrated the entire plot. From prison, he had given orders to his accomplices outside. He had told them to pressure Nusrat to withdraw her complaint or to kill her if she refused. On May 29, 2019, less than 2 months after Nusrat's death, the Police Bureau of Investigation submitted their charge sheet. A charge sheet is the official document that lists the criminal charges against the accused people. The PBI charged 16 individuals with murdering Nusrat. The 16 people charged were Principal S.M. Siraj Abdullah, the man who had ordered the killing from jail. 2 politicians from the ruling Awami League party, Ruhul Amin and Maqsood Alam. Other accomplices including Shahadat Hussain Shamim, Noor Uddin, Imran Hussain Mamoon, Hafez Abdul Quadar, Iftikhar Uddin Rana, Kamran Ahar Moni, Saifur Rahman Mohammed Zubair, a person known only as Javed, Ume Sultana Poppy, the classmate who lured Nusrat to the roof, Mohiuddin Shakil, Mohammed Shamim, Abdur Rahim Sharif, and Absar Uddin. Some of these people were teachers at the madrasa, some were students, some were local leaders or politicians. All of them had played some role in Nusrat's murder. According to the investigation, 12 of the 16 accused gave confessional statements under Section 164 of the Penal Code. This means that 12 of them confessed to their involvement in the crime in front of a magistrate. The trial began on June 10, 2019, at a special tribunal in Feni district. Bangladesh has special courts called Women and Children Repression Prevention Tribunals that handle cases of violence against women and children. These tribunals are supposed to handle cases more quickly than regular courts. Judge Mamunur Rashid presided over the trial. On June 20, 2019, all 16 of the accused were formally indicted by the court. This meant the court officially charged them with the crime and the trial could proceed. The trial moved forward with testimony from witnesses and examination of evidence. The lead prosecutor in the case was Hafez Ahmed. He presented the evidence against the 16 accused. The evidence included Nusrat's dying statement that had been recorded on video. It included the confessions that 12 of the accused had made. It included testimony from witnesses who had seen what happened. It included physical evidence from the crime scene. The prosecutors asked the court to impose the death penalty on all 16 of the accused. In Bangladesh, murder can be punished by death. The prosecutors argued that this was an especially heinous crime that deserved the most severe punishment. They pointed out that Nusrat had been murdered simply for reporting sexual harassment. They argued that the defendants had planned and carried out a brutal killing in order to silence a brave young woman who was seeking justice. The defense lawyers for the accused argued that their clients were innocent, or that the evidence against them was not strong. Siraj ud-Doula's lawyer was Mahfuzul Haq. Doula denied that he had ordered Nusrat's killing. He claimed he had nothing to do with her death. However, the prosecution had strong evidence against him, including testimony from the other accused, who said he had given the orders. The trial proceeded quickly by Bangladesh standards. Usually, criminal cases in Bangladesh take years to complete. Trials can drag on for many years before a verdict is reached. But because of the public outcry over Nusrat's case, and because Prime Minister Hasina had promised swift justice, this trial was fast-tracked. The entire trial, from the submission of the charge sheet on May 29th to the final verdict, took less than 5 months. The trial itself took only 62 days of actual proceedings. On October 24, 2019, just over 6 months after Nusrat's death, Judge Mamunur Rashid delivered the verdict. The courtroom was packed with people waiting to hear the decision. Nusrat's family was there. The families of some of the accused were there. Members of the media were there. Security was tight because emotions were running high. Judge Rashid found all 16 of the accused guilty of murder. He convicted Principal Siraj ud-Doula of ordering the killing from prison. He convicted the 2 Awami League politicians of participating in the conspiracy. He convicted the teachers and students who had lured Nusrat to the roof, who had tied her up, who had poured kerosene on her, and who had set her on fire. All 16 were found guilty. Then the judge announced the sentences. All 16 of the convicted murderers were sentenced to death. In addition, each of them was fined 100,000 taka, which is equal to about $1,183. When the verdicts were announced, there were different reactions in the courtroom. Some of the defendants burst into tears. Others shouted across the courtroom that they had been denied justice, that they were innocent. But for Nusrat's family, there was a sense that justice had finally been served. Nusrat's brother, Mahmudul Hassan Noman, spoke to reporters after the verdict. He said he was happy to see justice served in his sister's killing. They all took part in the murder. Now they have to face the consequences, he said. However, he also expressed fear for his own safety and that of his family. He told reporters, "You already know they threatened me in public, inside the courtroom. I am very afraid. I am urging the Prime Minister to ensure our security." This fear was well-founded. During the trial, Nusrat's family had received death threats. People had warned them to drop the case. Even in the courtroom there had been threats. The government had to provide police protection for Nusrat's family because of the danger they faced. Nusrat's mother, Shirin Akhtar, spoke through tears about the verdict. She said, "I can't forget her for a moment. I still feel the pain that she went through." The verdict brought some measure of comfort to the family, but it could never bring Nusrat back. Their daughter was gone forever. Nusrat's father, AKM Musa Manik, had spoken before the verdict was announced. He said he hoped to get justice. "The whole country had seen what happened to my daughter. She was an innocent girl and was brutally murdered for her strong stance against a wrongdoing." The public prosecutor, Hafez Ahmed, welcomed the verdict. He told reporters that it proved nobody will get away with murder in Bangladesh. He said, "It's an achievement for the judiciary." He emphasised that it was not just about murder, but about the reason Nusrat was killed. She had wanted justice for sexual harassment, and instead she was brutally murdered. He said a verdict like this was necessary to let people know that perpetrators cannot get away with sexual harassment and violence. However, not everyone was satisfied with the death sentences. Human Rights Watch, an international human rights organisation, issued a statement about the case. They welcomed the prosecution of the suspects and said it was important that the perpetrators were being held accountable. However, they said they did not support the use of the death penalty. Human Rights Watch opposes capital punishment in all cases, arguing that the death penalty is cruel and irreversible. They noted that Bangladesh should focus on preventing sexual violence and supporting survivors, rather than relying on the death penalty. In Bangladesh, the death penalty is carried out by hanging. This is a legacy of British colonial rule. Death sentences are common in Bangladesh, with hundreds of people on death row at any given time. However, executions do not happen frequently. Many people sentenced to death spend years or even decades on death row. The defence lawyers for the convicted murderers said they would appeal the sentences. Under Bangladesh law, people sentenced to death have the right to appeal to higher courts. The lawyers argued that the evidence had not been properly examined and that their clients deserved a new trial. However, given the overwhelming evidence in the case, including confessions from 12 of the 16 accused and Nusrat's dying statement, it seemed unlikely that the appeals would succeed. The case of Nusrat Jahan Rafi highlighted serious problems in Bangladesh. It showed that sexual harassment is widespread in Bangladesh's educational institutions, including madrasas. It showed that women who report sexual harassment often face serious consequences, including violence and even death. It showed that there is a culture in which powerful men feel they can harm women without facing punishment. According to research by the charity ActionAid, 80% of women working in Bangladesh's garment industry have either seen or experienced sexual violence at work. According to the women's rights group Mahila Parishad, in just the first 6 months of 2019, a total of 26 women were killed after being sexually assaulted. 592 women were allegedly raped, and 113 women said they were gang raped. These are just the reported figures. The true numbers are likely much higher because many women do not report sexual violence. Women who do report sexual harassment or assault often face judgment from their communities. They face harassment both in person and online. In some cases, they face violent attacks, just as Nusrat did. This creates a situation where most women choose to stay silent, rather than risk the consequences of speaking up. The quick verdict in Nusrat's case was seen as a positive sign by many people. It showed that when there is enough public pressure and political will, the justice system in Bangladesh can move quickly. However, activists pointed out that this should not be an exception. All cases of sexual violence should be treated with the same urgency. Meenakshi Ganguly, the South Asia director for Human Rights Watch, said that Nusrat's murder showed how badly the Bangladesh government has failed victims of sexual assault. She said, "In Nusrat's case, the judgment seems to be an effort to deal with public outrage. We have to ensure that the trials are fair to everybody." She noted that only 2% of women who face violence in Bangladesh are believed to seek justice. She said, "Systems need to be put in place by which women feel confident to report the cases. The police response is sensitive and the judicial process corruption-free." The case also raised questions about oversight of madrasas in Bangladesh. There are approximately 20,000 madrasas in the country, educating millions of students. Many of these schools are not subject to strict government oversight. This lack of regulation creates opportunities for abuse. After Nusrat's case became public, At least 5 more teachers at madrasas were arrested on charges of rape and sexual assault of their students. This suggested that the problem was widespread. Nusrat's case became a symbol of the fight against sexual violence in Bangladesh. Her bravery in reporting harassment despite the risks became an inspiration to other women. Her final words, "The teacher touched me, I will fight this crime till my last breath," became a rallying cry for women's rights activists. However, the case also showed the terrible price that women can pay for speaking up. Nusrat lost her life because she refused to stay silent about harassment. Her family lost their daughter and sister. They continue to live in fear for their own safety. The trauma of what happened to Nusrat will stay with them forever. As of the available information, the 16 people convicted of murdering Nusrat remain on death row in Bangladesh. They have the right to appeal to higher courts, and these appeals could take years to resolve. Even if the death sentences are upheld, it could be many more years before the sentences are actually carried out, if they ever are. The legacy of Nusrat Jahan Rafi is complicated. Her death was a tragedy that never should have happened. She should be alive today, continuing her education, building her life. Instead, she is dead at 19 because powerful men decided that silencing her was more important than justice. But Nusrat's story also shows extraordinary courage. She stood up for herself when it would have been easier to stay silent. She reported harassment even though she knew it could bring consequences. When people tried to intimidate her into withdrawing her complaint, she refused. Even as she was dying, she made sure to identify her attackers so they could be brought to justice. Her final act was an act of defiance against the people who had tried to silence her. Nusrat's case brought international attention to the issue of sexual violence in Bangladesh. It sparked protests and conversations about how to protect women and girls. It showed that the public in Bangladesh will not accept violence against women, that people will demand justice. Whether this will lead to lasting change remains to be seen. Bangladesh still has a long way to go in terms of protecting women from violence and ensuring that perpetrators are held accountable. But Nusrat's case showed that change is possible when people demand it. Her courage in fighting for justice, even at the cost of her own life, will not be forgotten. The story of Nusrat Jahan Rafi is a story about the courage of one young woman, the evil of 16 people who murdered her, and the failure of systems that should have protected her. It is a reminder that sexual harassment and violence against women are serious crimes that destroy lives. It is a call to action for societies everywhere to do better at protecting women and girls and at holding perpetrators accountable. And it is a memorial to a brave 19-year-old woman who fought for justice until her very last breath. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.